Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Echoes of War. I'm Craig from the Pacific War Channel, joined here by two co-hosts, Gaurav and Simon. How are you?
Hey Craig, great to be here. Hey Simone, glad to have you join us again. And we're looking forward to a very important in terms of historical influence of a naval battle, which is a bit anticlimactic, sadly.
Way to foreshadow it, Gaurav. It
You're
is
welcome.
technically one of the largest naval battle. Is it the? It is technically the largest naval battle in history. No,
I mean, you could make the case that probably by number of ships you've had like antiquity, like the Battle of Salamis and Cape Economus having a
Letty.
lot of ships.
Does it have more than
Lepanto
Letty
also had.
Gulf? I'm not sure if it does it have more than Letty Gulf. I'm not sure.
I actually don't know that. But it was a large battle, as you said, Greg.
No,
So we'll get to the sizes
in a bit.
in some time.
But before
But
we
yeah,
begin, I always want to remind the audience this is fully visualized on YouTube. We're gonna have maps, we're gonna have portraits, we're gonna be explaining things, probably drawing across the maps. So please join us on YouTube for the visual experience. And we're now going to be rolling out a clips channel. So there's going to be 10-minute kind of clip videos showcasing this. You can check that out on Echoes of War clips channel. But before we dive into it, if you'd like to support the channel further, consider checking out our YouTube membership or our Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel, where you get access to the exclusive podcast series. It's going to be 26 episodes and ongoing soon. You also get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. But stating all of that, Gareth, where do we begin with this episode, the Battle of Jutland?
one, I'm gonna just say that the year 1916 is the year of the war, World War One. You have so many massive events taking place across all theaters. You have the battles of Verdun and Somme on the Western Front. We have the Battle of Jutland, which is the star of today's series. We have the Brusilov offensive in the east with Eastern Front, which was also a massive military undertaking. We've had the fifth and sixth battles of the Isonzo, which also cost both sides over 400,000 casualties between them. You had Romania join the war. You had the tanks make their debut. So it was a pretty eventful year from the war perspective. But as I said, today is the star is the Battle of Jutland, which was one of the largest naval battles in history, where you had almost 250 warships of the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet clash with each other, Jutland in the North Sea. And it was a test between what was the naval arms race which we covered in the previous episode, because all those dreadnoughts had to be used somewhere or the other. And Germany was the only navy that had the tonnage to even pose a threat to the British. Because at the start of World War One, the British had about 29 dreadnoughts, the Germans had about 17. France had 10, and Austria-Hungary had 3, and Russia had 4. So, like they don't count, right? They're not even that big.
Ah, yes, we all
And
know the great navy of Austria-Hungary.
but if you look at the tonnage, Britain had about 2.2 million tons of shipping, right, in terms of their military vessels at the start of World War One. Germany was the only other navy that eclipsed a million. They were larger than pretty much the French and Russian navies combined as well at this point. So it finally had to give in, and perhaps you could take like a little bit of time first to just talk a quick walkthrough of the various naval theaters that have, you know, we've seen some encounters across the world. So, Craig, maybe you could talk about some of the Far East encounters and in the Americas as well, between the British and Germans.
Yeah, unfortunately, my specialization is mostly in the Asia Pacific. So if somebody had the foresight, they would have started this with the American Civil War because that's when the ironclads first, had significant engagements, and that would lead into some other engagements sprinkled about in the Atlantic, not too much. Then when you get into the Asia Pacific, you see the most significant one is the First Sino-Japanese War, and that's the first Battle of the Yalu River, where the Japanese embarrassed the Beiyang fleet, which was one of four fleets of the Qing dynasty. It was the only notable one, led by one of their most notable diplomats. Also, I can't get into the history of it, but China was extremely corrupt, and their four fleets were not just not working together, they were actively against each other because they were fighting for resources. So this fleet was kind of just left to go face the Japanese, and it was completely destroyed. But on paper, the Chinese were the only ones boasting what would be called quote unquote battleships. We would not consider them today to be battleships, mind you, but they were two German made large ships. The one of them was called the Jieyuan, and the other one was a Dingyuan. And it scared the Japanese. The Chinese had actually paraded them at Nagasaki a few years before this war would occur. And basically, the Japanese completely adopted the Jundekou doctrine because they realized they couldn't possibly build ships big enough. So they put all of their resources into fast cruisers with high firepower, and they just trained in gunnery for the Qing. They didn't train properly, and their bureaucracy was embezzling everything. So I don't know. You maybe you've heard the classic tale when they were loading the shells into their cannons, they would find them filled with porcelain or cement. You'd hear all sorts of stuff like this. So they had proper guns. They had quite a few English, German, and there was a few other nationalities for advisors on the ships who were well-trained admirals in their own right and could have probably led the action well, but basically corruption ended up losing them the battle. But there was a lot of foreign advisors who got to see this battle, and this is what's kind of important about it. It went against the naval doctrines that they all believed. They thought that their larger ships would be firing from pretty extreme ranges into the other ships, and that's how you would win a naval battle. You would basically use the larger range of your own ships. So better caliber guns you have, you would just win because you would outshoot them before they can get close enough to attack you. The reverse happened at this battle. The Japanese withheld their fire. They came in as basically close as they needed to, and then they just destroyed the Chinese as the Chinese were firing from extreme ranges and they were just flopping everywhere. They basically didn't make many hits. So this battle changed a lot of perceptions across the other navies in the world. But then things turn right on their head when the legendary Battle of Tsushima happens during the Russo-Japanese War, where what everyone thought would happen did happen. They were firing from extreme ranges, and again, the Japanese were superior in their training and their gunnery. So when the Russians' second navy, after the first one was destroyed, mind you, came to fight them, the Russians had shown up. They had sailed across the entire globe at that point. They weren't coaling up properly because the
That
British.
legendary voyage.
Yeah, it's an incredible
Yeah.
story, the voyage. The British didn't let them coal up. Even the French, who were supposed to be allied to them, kind of were not even letting them coal up and stuff.
Actually, I read because both countries were technically neutral in the conflict,
Yes, there was a
the
rule
rules
about
of
it.
war.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
and yeah,
as far as I know, the Germans actually were the ones supplying them with coal,
yes,
but
But
they didn't have
that is
enough
why company.
stations. They
exactly.
didn't have enough stations to resupply them, so the Russians simply hold the coal on top of the decks,
Yep.
causing a lot of the sailors to die of black lung.
Yep, that is what happened, and a lot of these Russians that were aboard, they almost mutinied about three times, if I remember correctly, because of just the terrible conditions they faced. They couldn't
And
spend much time at
let's
ports. Yeah, it was
let's
bad.
also talk about the legendary Kamchatka one day.
Exactly. So,
But
needless to say, when the Russians showed up, they didn't do any gunnery training en route, nor in general did the Russians have much training at sea because a lot of these guys they come from either like the Black Sea or the Baltic and they can only train certain months of the year. And honestly, I can't get into it. The Russian Navy was stupid. They had no idea what they were doing. They didn't have proper ways of training in general. And you could even mention alcoholism was a significant factor in this. It's true, they were drinking heavily. So yeah, they show up to this. The Japanese had specifically spent months up until this point because they knew that the Russians were coming, and they just intensely trained. They weren't going to port. They were out at sea the whole time. So you're talking about kind of like if two boxers are about to fight, one of them, arrogant as hell, doesn't train for a year. The other guy, he's an up and comer, trains the whole time, and he just knocks him out. That's what ended up happening. But at the battle, Admiral Togo famously crossed the Russian T because the Japanese ships were much faster as the Russian ships were they were in dire need of repairs by the time they showed up, and they were taken by surprise, mind you. It was an unbelievably lopsided battle for the Japanese. Knocked out what remained of the Russian fleet, which would cripple Russia for decades to come when it comes to the Navy. But after that, I mean there are a few naval engagements before that in World War One, but I'd say we can go into World War One a bit, where now we're looking at dreadnoughts, pre-dreadnoughts. But from my
But would you not agree that Tsushima definitely, when Jackie Fisher got the reports of the British attaches who were on the Japanese fleet, it no doubt reinforced his
Oh, of
theories.
course. It reinforced everybody's theories. It's not the start. It's what drives the big gun club idea that goes right into 1942-ish when they're starting to figure out aircraft carriers are going to overwhelm that idea. But yeah. And then you get World War One, and there's tons of naval engagements, but I'll just speak about the ones I know by heart, kind of. Again, it's Asia Pacific. You have the East Asia Squadron of Maximilian von Spee, and he's basically completely isolated. He's going to be hunted by the Japanese, Anzac, British forces. So he just decides he's going to hightail it out of the Pacific by going around Cape Horn and going into the Atlantic to get back to Germany. But along the way, he just legendarily raids everything he can, and I mean, it's an incredible story. He detaches one ship, the SMS Emden, which goes on her own raid in the Indian Ocean, and she causes a shit ton of panic amongst the Entente powers. It's very impressive that one ship did what she did. But for von Spee, he gets to about the area of the Chilean coast, and he's now being hunted by another force, which was sent after him by the British. It's a very complicated situation, but the British give ambiguous orders to the admiral at the scene, and he's under the belief that he's to engage the enemy, even though his one significant piece of firepower is a very old ship called the HMS Canopus. It can't possibly hunt down the Germans because it's too slow, but it has the largest guns capable of taking them out. He thinks his orders are to go no matter what, so he just leaves it behind, says, try to catch up to us. He tries to attack von Spee, and his cruisers get annihilated by the Germans. It's a very lopsided fight. It has to do a lot with the time of day. The Germans used the sun against him. He showed up with forces that were not just slower, they were outgunned significantly. The Germans simply just battered them. So the Germans end up destroying this British force at Coronel. It's really embarrassing for the Royal Navy. So they send like a kind of ridiculous force to hunt down the Germans again. And this culminates in another battle at the Falkland Islands. And there we see two ships that I think are going to be at Jutland. It's the Invincible, I believe. It's the two battle cruisers. I can't remember the names of them. It's Indomitable and Invincible, if I'm not mistaken. But they overwhelm the Germans, who have half their ammunition because they can't possibly resupply at this point. And the East Asia Squadron gets obliterated by what is a faster, more heavily armed, and even arguably more armored ships, just proving the point that battle cruisers can take on cruisers, but battle cruisers will end up being kind of the most useless ships later on. Everyone will figure out. And I
But it was a bit of an overkill with a squadron of five German cruisers against like five British cruisers plus two battle cruisers.
Well, yeah, but von Spee, when his intelligence indicated to him it was going to be that HMS Canopus, which couldn't possibly race out, so he was thinking to himself, you know what? We don't even have to go and raid the Falkland Islands, but we can probably get away with it because they only have three. He thought they had three ships. It was the HMS Defense, uh, Good Hope, and another ship, I forget the name of which. He thought he would send two ships in, they would lure these ships out, they knock them out at sea, raid the Falkland Islands, and then just get out of there. When he shows up, they're all of a sudden fired upon by, like you said, these two battle cruisers that significantly outsped them. And these two things, they could have took out his entire fleet. But yeah, it was really bad for him. It's a legendary way to go down, though. It definitely was moral. It was demoralizing for the Germans, but it was also kind of this heroic, they had raided for so long, almost for like a full year, and got away with it. And yeah, that would bring us, that's in World War One now, and the next significant engagement, I guess, Gareth, if you want to talk about it, is Dogger Bank.
I guess I think I'll just talk about actually Gallipoli. I believe
Sure.
Simon has a little bit for Dogger Bank, but that's also like the prelude to two of our admirals who will be fighting. They fought there. But in Gallipoli, it's not really an engagement per se, but just the sheer, you know, arrogance of the Western allies. Because the Russians had a desperate plea to the French and British by late 1914 that, hey guys, could you please take out the Ottomans from our, theater of operations? We're already getting our, you know, suffering catastrophic losses against the Germans. And initially, the British kind of like don't support that idea, more so due to the fact that they were trying to buy the Ottomans' loyalty, which failed. Now, what happens is in 1915 in January, Vice Admiral Carden proposed sending a force through the Dardanelles using battleships, submarines, and minesweepers. And a month later, the British war cabinet like, oh yeah, this is a brilliant plan. Here, take even more battleships. Now, keep in mind, most of the battleships that would be committed here are the pre-dreadnoughts, so it's fine. They are like, as some of the ships will be described, the 5-minute ships.
I mean, to be blunt, Sir Winston Churchill specifically, his part of the plan was these ships will never see action. They're shit. We want to get rid of them. Why don't we just send them off and they can do the best job that they can, get sunk over there doing some damage? That was it.
Yeah,
Well,
it's fine because like when we get to Jutland, some of the old pre-dreadnoughts that would be sailing were literally called the 5-minute ships by the German Navy. But in addition to these old pre-dreadnoughts that is given to Carden, he does get HMS Queen Elizabeth, which is a modern battleship. It's a modern dreadnought, and HMS Inflexible. Yeah, Inflexible was all over. And the France also gives like a few battleships. The great Russian naval contribution was one cruiser.
Of course. Just to say they
And
were
then
there.
yeah, and one of the forces that also got committed for the entire operation was the Royal Marines and the 29th Army Division. The reason why I just wanted to bring that up was at this point, by committing the force here, Britain, from its professional army that had existed and reserves, right, like the army reserves, they are now fully committed. So now it's after this, it's just going to be the conscript units that are going to be feeding into the line. Just I thought it was just a bit of a important thing to note. Now, the Ottoman outer defenses had a lot of fortresses on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and they had guns which had ranges from 9 miles to about half of it. And there were like multiple defensive works which had been started, and a minefield had been laid out, or they was building one up since August 1914. Now, of the 100 guns in the pre-war defenses of the Ottoman forts here in the Dardanelles, only 14 were really heavy and long range, and 86 of them were carriage-mounted breech-loading guns. So they're not the howitzers or the field guns that dominate the world now. But so, Churchill does want the attack made. So on the 25th, like 19th February, you have like, two destroyers going in as, in like probing attacks to the straits. And then, the battleships HMS Cornwallis and Vengeance move in to engage with the Cornwallis and all. They're not able to do much damage because one of the key things is ships attacking fortifications. It's not really something that always, works. And on 25th February, the Allies attack again. And, 4 battleships are committed to the battle and to clear it. But again, they suffer a few capital ship losses. And the biggest action takes place on the 9th of 18th March, where the British and French line up their ships in just like a big show of force. Okay, so they are in four lines, four across. So just imagine like a 4x4 square. That's pretty much how they lined up with two battleships in reserve, and they attacked the Ottoman forts and got their, they were not able to knock out the guns or even sight them properly because a lot of the Ottoman guns were on the reverse side of the slope, and their spotters were able to call out accurate information. And in this battle, the Ottomans suffer 118 casualties, but they sank three battleships and damaged three others. And after this, the admirals did not do what Churchill said, which was like, let these ships go and, let them try to fight their way through and do whatever damage they can. They're anyways relics. The admirals were not willing to commit anything further. So we have the start of the Gallipoli campaign, which was initially first to clear out the Dardanelles Peninsula to allow the ships to move to Constantinople and, put a show of force. But that was pretty much it, you could say, from the theater, from the naval point of view. Maybe, Simon, we could just quickly touch upon Dogger Bank.
Yeah. So to understand Dogger Bank, we first of all have to understand the situation in the North Sea, which is essentially that the German Navy is trapped. By the Brits designed a blockade which essentially blocked all trade to Germany, and which was actually illegal. The treaties of the time actually state that neutral countries must be allowed to go to every country, but well, the British did not care, and they forced everybody to stop trading. Well, they did care in a sense that they reimbursed the traders for the damages, but it was
I believe
still
they
very
would.
much illegal.
I think what they were trying to do was, if it was like a ship from Norway or Sweden, right, which were neutral countries, moving to German ports, the British blockade forces would stop them, search them, and if they feel that it's vital to the war, they will turn them back or sink them with a warning or something like that. But if it was nothing like maybe say going to impact Germany from the war standpoint, I think they let it go, right? But they would like illegally board it, you could say, those
Well,
vessels.
yes, to some extent, but we also have to keep in mind food is something that is vital to a war effort and was not allowed to be traded to Germany, which caused a massive issue with starvation of the civilian population, especially.
Yeah, it was called the Turnip War for a while.
Yeah, so this essentially caused the Navy to be trapped there, and essentially all that they could do was raid the British coastline. And on one of these raids, the British sailed against them and forced a minor battle. And this caused, as before mentioned, the Battle of the Dogger Banks, where the British predicted the path of the returning German Navy, and caused this battle, which was kind of all indecisive. It caused more losses for the Germans, but it didn't really do much to change the actual situation. And one source I've read actually pointed out that one of the important things of this battle was that the Germans realized that they needed to protect their ammunition, which will come in later when we talk about the Battle of Jutland.
Fair enough.
And another thing is, if you are British fishermen of the time, do not fish at the Dogger Bank. There's a high chance you will get shot at by battleships.
Not just
Or
at this time.
or the fictitious boarding parties could board the fishing ships this time.
Or maybe the
Um,
Japanese torpedo boat would
Yeah.
come in and attack them.
Yeah. During the Russo-Japanese War, that was one of the silliest things. The Russians just thinking these ghost ships are attacking them, start firing upon fishermen who are like showing them they're fishermen when the searchlights come on them. Oh my God.
well, you got to understand those are like metal melting nets, so
Yeah.
they had to wait. Wait. But the funny thing was when just quick thing about that Dogger Bank incident of the Russo-Japanese War when the British were outraged and both the Home Fleet and Mediterranean Fleet were ordered to kind of come into a pincer,
Yep.
outnumbering the Russians already 4-1, and they have superior seamanship. That the admiral of the Home Fleet studied the reports. He's like, okay, I'll give the Russians a fair battle. 3 of my battleships versus every one of them. But
There is
I
one
think,
other thing from
yeah,
the small battle of Dogger Bank in World War One. The British had by that time broken the some of the naval codes, and that's how they figured out where they were going to be. The Germans actually, some of them thought there was a possibility that the codes have been broken, but ultimately they concluded that no, it was kind of a freak accident, and that was it's a significant screw up on their part because if they had figured out the encryption had been compromised, it would have changed the course of events going forward. But yeah,
I think they actually do. I'll get to it in when we get into the battle details, but it's not the First World War where
yeah,
British decryption of the enemy intelligence was pretty good. And I would even say faster than the enemy. But just one thing I'll just say is I found a chart which gave me like a bit of information. At the start of the war, Britain had a force. So this is like how why Britain was so focused on the Germans was if you include dreadnoughts, pre-dreadnoughts, battle cruisers, coast defense ships, cruisers from armored cruisers to protected to light and scout cruisers, destroyers and torpedo boats, and submarines. The Royal Navy is a force of 522 surface and 73 submarines. The Germans were a force of 298 surface ships and 31 submarines. So it is a very powerful force for the Royal Navy to contend with because they do not have as many resources needed to defend uh, the farther reaches of their empire as much as the British. So there could be actually a point where locally the Germans could gain a naval superiority in numbers. Now, I think what really kicks the fleet into this battle is, as we mentioned, that as Simon mentioned, the Germans have kind of been a bit reluctant to commit to the battle. And they pretty much are here behind their protective minefields so that they are pretty much in Wilhelmshaven. And the British do not want to go to them because, well, why would you want to sail through a minefield? We've seen so many examples. I think, Craig, especially you, count so many Japanese battleships that were casualties in the Russo-Japanese War to mines. So, which is why we had that entire blockade. Now,
I uh,
yeah,
I actually found numbers of just how many mines were just laid out in the North Sea during the entire First World War, which was 190,000.
damn, that's a lot because naval mines are much larger than the land mines. But so the Germans were here, and as we know that by now they're already starting to face the supply shortages that Germany always faces in world wars. But the first real reason why the event takes place is the death of the previous the fleet commander. So one moment, I'll just give you. So the Germans had the naval posture, which is the doctrine of Admiral Hugo von Pohl. And even though the Germans had considered a lot of operation, like trying to force the Low Countries or Denmark, or somehow try to support the land forces with offensive operations, even as far as early 1916, they really did not do anything except just take the fleet and being strategy, if you will, and were just behind the minefield protection. Now, early in 19, and this really pissed off Admiral Tirpitz because he built up the fleet and he wanted it to go into action and fight the British head on. Now, in early 1916, Admiral Walpole, whose health had been deteriorating, dies, and he is replaced by Admiral Reinhard Scheer. Now, Simon, before we continue, Simon, do you want to talk about Scheer? Because reading about him, you really gotta like that guy.
Yeah. So
I have a picture if you
yeah,
would like. So Scheer is now the new commander of the entire German high seas fleet.
yeah. So she has something rather unique of the time, which is that he is actually not a noble or has no noble heritage. He's just a guy, but he is so good at this job that he gets promoted and promoted and promoted to actually be in the position to lead the entirety of the German fleet. And
I mean, he's had a long career. He joined at the age of 15.
yeah. Now he took over from his predecessor, who was really cautious. He didn't want to go into battle because losing ships is expensive. And so the focus was more on the submarine warfare and even an experience with pirates pretending trading ships that are actually armed with heavy guns to fight merchant ships.
Pirates of the North Sea.
Actually, they go down on one ship, leaves, gets through the blockade, gets discovered immediately and is destroyed. The second ship, which is called the Wolf, actually makes a giant journey, goes all the way down to Africa, I think, and harasses traders everywhere, and even manages to get back to Germany. They say they raid stuff for an entire year, and entire squadrons of ships are sent after them.
Got it. But he was also an expert of the torpedo as well. So the reason we would see also a German focus on torpedo warfare later with the submarines was he did really like that weapon system.
Yeah, and he was a bit more aggressive as his predecessor, which is also why he decided that maybe we should try fighting a battle finally to hopefully break this blockade, because the blockade is the real issue.
True enough. And I would just add that prior to his command of the entire fleet, he did command the third battle squadron of the German Navy, which at that time was a force of 8 dreadnoughts. So it's quite a powerful force that he did have prior to getting his grand appointment. And to your point, Simon, that I did see there was a quote. He said of the German Navy, like his view. He's like, he has no faith, in a quote, no faith in a fleet that was bought through the war intact. We are at present fighting for our existence. In this life or death struggle, I cannot understand how anyone can think that any weapon that can be used against the enemy should be wrestled in the sheath. So that kind of gives you a good idea of what's his mentality. And he did set out like 3 guiding principles as well. One is just let's accept the fact that we are not going to be outnumbering the British anytime soon. And the second principle was at all points he wants to maintain this constant pressure. So it just like, keep the Royal Navy occupied, increase the wear and tear on these units, drain them of supplies and such. And if possible, which is what he would want, is ambush squadrons. Like, I'm not talking about like a picket group of destroyers or something, but like squadrons of the battle cruisers or such, quickly overwhelm them with force. And the third was, to use submarines in action. Now, at this point, we should know that the Germans had withdrawn the use of the submarines from that. What is it called? All-out submarine warfare or unrestricted submarine warfare, I believe that's the term.
Unrestricted, yeah.
Yeah. They had withdrawn it right now at this early stage of the war. They would revive it later because of, diplomatic backlash from the United States, which was understandable because they are completely out of the war. So he did actually have some submarines available for him to use. And so he presented a plan to the Kaiser and managed to convince the Kaiser to back his plan and give him the approval to go ahead, which was to use Admiral Hipper's squadrons to kind of like, engage and lure like a powerful British force while he is leading the main force of the German high seas fleet, and then get a quick local superiority numbers, overwhelm them, and cause a lot of damage to them. Simon, do you have anything about Admiral Hipper? Since at this time he was actually considered the star of the German Navy, you could say.
Yeah, so Admiral Hipper has essentially, he has also been in the Navy for a long time, has fought in a few battles, but I actually found a source that essentially says he was mediocre. He was a bit calculating, but in his skill he was mediocre. And
Was he
as the
decisive
reason he
though?
is,
Was he decisive? Because I read about Scheer, he was quite a decisive character.
what I've heard is that Hipper was more calculating and cold, but he lacked a bit of decisiveness.
Fair enough. And I guess, unfortunately, unlike Scheer, he was kind of part of that, still like you could call it the legacy system that's still left over from 19th century warfare, right?
Yeah.
At least I would just say overall, Britain, France, and Germany, the legacy isn't as bad as it was in the Russian Empire at this time. But yeah. Now, one of the key events that actually does happen about a month before Jutland, which actually ties down quite a few Royal Navy forces, was there was a raid on the south of England by the German surface ships. It was a small cruiser and destroyer force, not significant damage or anything, but the Admiralty got really worried that. One moment, let me just find. Okay, this is like one of the biggest problems. So if you see here, they managed to attack some civilian targets in this area near Dover and all near the mouth of the Thames. And this actually sent the Admiralty in a bit of a panic because they actually committed a few dreadnoughts and cruisers, including the namesake of the entire generation, HMS Dreadnought, to guard against the coast. So this was actually quite a bit of a big raid. Now, Scheer's plan was to get the battle cruisers of the High Seas Fleet and ambush the British battleship cruiser division only. Okay, without taking significant losses. And he also wanted to first, lure them out into battle. And the intention was in the planned axis of advance, he was to gain, have some submarines positioned around here so that they can launch torpedoes and with luck, hit a few of the capital ships. Even if you just take down a few cruisers and destroyers, it's still something. Now, what the plan that Scheer did concoct was Hipper's battlecruiser division would come over here and shell Sunderland. Newcastle, it's a small is town next to Newcastle, and they have a pretty big football derby there. But the idea was they will come, they'll raid, and the British Grand Fleet will get the reports that German battle cruisers have shelled the coast, and then they will move to engage, and then that's where he would spring his ambush. That was pretty much the essence of the plan, and ideally they would be smacked by submarines on their way to engage the high seas, the Grand Fleet. Now, Craig, as you mentioned, the British had been decrypting the German traffic. There was Room 40. I guess you could call it World War I's equivalent of Bletchley Park. And because of this, the British were able to actually concentrate their forces way better than the Germans, because they were able to understand the traffic and then reroute the ships accordingly. Now, the operation was planned for, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for the 23rd of May. But here is where the Germans suffered, I would call a pretty significant setback for Scheer's original battle plan. Was the battleships of the Cunning class, which is one of their newest dreadnought class battleships, all needed some repair. So he delayed the start of the operation. We're not going to sail out. And the repairs took a few more days longer than anticipated. And there was then very bad weather in the area towards the end of the month of May that delayed the departure. So the German fleet will not be leaving until the 31st of May. Why is this a problem? Because all those spare submarines that were not being utilized for the unrestricted submarine warfare and were to be employed in the ambush, well, they departed on 17th of May, but had fuel till 31st of May. And because of the imposed radio silence, they were not told about the delays to the plan. Really great planning, Scheer. And then so this is the situation, and so he just modified the plan, and instead of having this encounter kind of, you could say, like middle of the ground, because with his original plan was the submarines are going to take out some casualties, so it'll be easier. He does want to get the planned engagement area to be closer towards the German land, so that at least if things do go south, he has a shorter line of retreat. And as the map Simon did have, I don't know if I have it here. God damn it. Sorry, I'm so sorry. But this entire minefield is there, and he knows that the British are not going to pursue him there. So the High Seas Fleet does depart on the 31st. But the problem is, the British have already decrypted this, and Admiral Jelico, John Jellicoe, who is in Scapa Flow over here, has been notified by the Admiralty or given the reports, and he's preparing to react. Craig, do you have anything you would like to say about Jellicoe?
Yeah, do you have a picture? Do you want me to toss up a picture?
I do have it.
Okay.
Or maybe you could put this more colorful image of
Yeah, I was
Jellicoe.
gonna say that is really colorful. So at the time, the admiral of the fleet, John Wadsworth Jellicoe, Jellicoe, the first Earl of Jellicoe, was a distinguished British naval officer whose career, by this point, it spanned several pivotal years in the Royal Navy. He had been born December the 5th of 1859, and he had joined the Navy in 1872, quickly rising through the ranks due to his aptitude. Apparently, he was just born for the Navy, as many people would say, and he showed a lot of qualities for leadership. He served in various capacities, including aboard the HMS Nelson, and then later the HMS Dreadnought, which is pretty interesting to say the least. It's a very symbolic ship, especially for this battle and for this time. And he acquired a lot of technical expertise in naval warfare, which is very important for the turn of the century, and particularly during World War One. By the outbreak of World
He
War
was
One,
actually,
oh, yeah,
I would just add, like, by 1904, he was kind of like a protege of Jackie Fisher.
yeah, and he's of course going to be in command of the Grand Fleet, the primary fleet unit based out of Scafell Flow in the Scotland. His strategic mindset and emphasis on gunnery and tactical training would prove to be pivotal in the large-scale engagements that would come, such as this one. And I don't want to give too much up about, when you hear about his name, everybody would talk about what happens in the Battle of Jutland, but we're not going to spoil that. But he had a reputation for being cautious, but very thorough. And he was notably quite good at naval strategy. And I mean, it goes without saying, as you've mentioned, having broken the German codes, they were able to form quite long-term strategies and exploit a lot of what the Germans were trying to do whenever they would try to break out of the blockade and mess around. So honestly, the poker, he had the hand of cards. He was going to be the one who was going to be dictating when and where battles would actually take place, and Jutland's going to be one of them. And he's definitely a key figure in World War One when it comes to naval history.
I would also say one thing I really love about Jellicoe is he was a commander who cared for his men.
Mhm.
So Scapa Flow is right up in the north.
Mhm.
Like, it's a great anchorage, right? Like these islands right up at the northern tip of Scotland. It's a great anchorage, but really bad for men because there's nothing.
The Scotch.
And
Just throwing it out there. I like
I
Scotch, and
don't
I've
think,
had a few from there. Yeah,
but I don't think they had any distilleries back then. But
maybe not.
so the bulk of the British fleet was, centered here. It was the Grand Fleet, right? I keep sometimes mixing up the High Seas Fleet and Grand Fleet, but bulk of the strength of the British Grand Fleet was stationed here. And while it's a great anchorage, he had to ensure that yes, the proper amount of supplies was taken or was sent everywhere, and he made sure it came. Or the sailors never stopped there. And it was like they needed about 2,000 tons of food every month, fuel, ammo. He got material so that they could build facilities for the men. So they had like cricket grounds, football grounds, even a 80-hole golf course, theaters, so that and drill grounds, so that the men could actually, beyond the routine of maintaining the ships, have something to do. And one of the things that I really do like is he made the Admiralty send schoolmasters from the naval school to teach a lot of the sailors and junior officers, which many did take him up on this offer. So it's a really nice touch. And there was also this nice story was he had to he found out one of his staff officers had to recently became a father, and that man was from London. So Jellicoe sent him down to London to deliver some papers in person to the Admiralty. And he timed it in a way so that between the man's arrival in London and when he had to report to the Admiralty, he had about 8 hours. So Jellicoe hoped that he would have used that time to, spend time with his newborn child and wife. So because of this guy has the, undying loyalty of a lot of his men. And one thing is, he does get along with one of the key admirals, but not BT. Because Jellicoe is still, you could say, procedural and old school. He still follows the orders and expects it to be followed in the same tradition. I'll get to that when we describe some of the action, because that's going to play a big role in the entire battlecruiser action. So, and one more thing for Jellicoe, he was a pioneer for the aircraft carrier, you could say. If you say Jackie Fisher's pet project was the Dreadnought. He was the guy leading for HMS Campania, which was like a converted liner to be the first aircraft carrier which could launch recon planes and light seaplanes. It would have been pretty pivotal, but unfortunately, Campania would not be dispatched for this upcoming engagement. And ultimately, he would be going kind of blind beyond the Admiralty reports and surface ship sightings for this upcoming engagement.
Ironically, the Japanese were kind of the foremost at this with the Wakimia. During the Russo-Japanese War, they had used it against the Germans at the Battle of Tsingtao. But I think it was a Balkan engagement where the first actions happened with quote unquote a seaplane carrier. So I can't remember who was using it. I don't know if maybe it's the Italians or something, but after that, the Japanese were kind of the pioneers of it.
True enough. But so one of the key things that we do need to discuss was there was one British unit which is going to play a big role for today, and that is the 5th Battle Division. This was a battle division consisting of 4 battleships of the Queen Elizabeth class. This is like currently the most up-to-date British warships. You can call them the super dreadnoughts of the. I think this is like one of the warships. So you could see these. It had its main armament were these 4 pairs of 80 or 15-inch guns. So nothing in the German fleet is even close to this firepower per ship.
Considered small firepower by World War II. It's funny to say. It's like these large
It's
15-inch
crazy.
guns. Yeah.
But at this time, they are like, I guess you could call them the Yamato equivalent, let's say.
Super Dreadnoughts.
This Queen
Yeah, Super
Elizabeth.
Dreadnoughts. Pretty good.
Yeah, so the problem was, in the meantime, they were commanded by an Admiral Evan Thomas. You have just this one picture. Greg, do you want to talk about a little bit about Admiral Thomas because he is the commander of this very vital force?
Yeah, honestly, I've listened and read a bit about the Battle of Jutland, but it was only when you brought this up recently that I even heard this guy's name, Admiral Hugh Thomas Evans. He had a distinguished career in the Royal Navy leading up, of course, to the battle we're talking about. He was born in 1865. He would join the Royal Navy in 1879, and he rapidly rose through the ranks due to apparently people said he was very dedicated and he showed a lot of skill right at the start. He gained a lot of valuable on-hand experience in various capacities, serving on quite a few different ships, including the HMS Bachant, and he learned the essentials of naval operations while at sea. He was recognized for having leadership skills and quite good at some tactical skills as well during his early positions. He would also be serving aboard the HMS Dreadnought and later the HMS Warrior, both pretty iconic ships. He played a pivotal role in the development of naval tactics at this time, especially in battleship technologies as they were evolving rapidly at the turn of the century. By the early 1900s, he had reached the rank of captain and he was involved in some notable exercises that would shape their naval doctrines going forward. In 1912, he was appointed the commander of the 1st Battle Squadron of the Grand Fleet, which would be a critical role because it placed him at the forefront of naval operations. And his reputation would just keep growing from there, and he would eventually be promoted to Rear Admiral. So this is, at the cusp of the Battle of Jutland, where by that point he was recognized for his ability to lead large-scale naval forces effectively. So this would set him for the role that he's going to be playing now.
Yeah, and I think so. The issue was, if we go back to the map that as you can see, Scapa Flow did house a good chunk of the fleet, but not all of it. There was the British Battlecruiser Division under Admiral David Beatty. Greg, maybe we can talk about him just momentarily.
Mm.
I'll just maybe talk about this conflict before we can talk about Beatty, who were based in the Fort of Firth over here. Now, the problem was Jellicoe wanted all the dreadnoughts to be with him and all battle cruisers, and the 5th Battle Division was the 5th Battle Squadron, sorry, was a contention point. Battle cruisers, by nature, trade away armor for increased speed. So at the Battle of Jutland, if you see most of the battleships between both the British and German navies, like just the dreadnoughts, right? I'm not talking about the German free dreadnoughts. They have a max cruising speed of about 20 to 21 knots. Battle cruisers, on the other hand, can have a speed from about 25 to 28 knots. Now, the Queen Elizabeth class of what Admiral Tom has, they can cruise at 24 knots, so significantly faster than any battleship, and just about can keep up with a battle cruiser squadron. So BT is like, you should give this to me because I have the fast ships. I can move fast, I can hit hard. And Jellicoe is not too keen. And BT then makes a case that, the gunnery practice ranges that I have at the 4th or 5th over here in my naval bases, they're pretty shit. My crews are lacking in gunnery training. So can I keep them so like they kind of reached a compromise where a couple of battle cruisers at any given time of BT would be transferred to Jellicoe's main battle group, where they can train at the better ranges. And once they are trained, they will return to BT's command, and the other battle cruisers will go up to get trained. And until they're all trained, the 5th Battle Squadron is going to stay with him. Craig, maybe we could just talk a little bit about Vice Admiral BT.
Mhm.
Because his decisions are going to play a pretty big role.
Yeah. So Admiral of the Admiral of the Fleet David Richard Beatty, the first Earl of Beatty, was a prominent British naval officer. He was known for his leadership skills prior to World War One. He was born January the 17th of 1871. He's a bit younger than the rest. He joined the Royal Navy in 1884, quite early, and quickly established a reputation for bravery and rapid advancement. He served aboard various ships, including the HMS Devonshire, the HMS Queen of Mary, and he would demonstrate exceptional gunnery skills, and he was notably quite aggressive in his approach to naval tactics. By 1914, he held command of, as you're saying, the battlecruiser fleet, and he gained quite a bit of fame for his decisive actions during the early stages of World War One, particularly during the Battle of Helgoland, Helgoland Blight, and he led, a successful attack against German forces here and there. His charisma and his bold tactics, earned him a lot of respect in the Navy, and he would be promoted to Vice Admiral. Prior to the Battle of Jutland, he was controlling one of the most pivotal fleets going forward, and as you had mentioned, he was emphasizing speed and firepower. He was given the task of engaging the German high seas fleet whenever possible, and he was given quite a lot of room to do so because they saw his strengths as being quite aggressive, a little bit bold, to say. But he is going to butt heads with Jellicoe, and I don't want to give away too much of what's going to happen,
The
but
irony was, at this point, he is second in command of the Royal Navy, you could say.
he's in a they're butting heads together, and it's actually it's not good for operations. And it's I mean, if you even know his name, you know that he's going to be the guy who kind of messed up a little bit at
B BT.
yeah, at Jutland.
I think I'll just elaborate a little bit about Jellicoe and him, because Jellicoe did not want to give him more ships because he's like, this guy has way more firepower. His aggression is going to, want him to seek an action, and he's just going to put catastrophic losses on us because of that. And it's interesting to note, Admiral Evans and Admiral Jellicoe, they are proteges of Jackie Fisher. BT is not. So there's also like that kind of rivalry that could be at play. And as I said, Jellicoe is very procedural and traditional in his outlook. And he has that particular style that is more doctrinal to how the Royal Navy would operate and communicate with each other. Whereas BT is, as you said, Greg, he's very aggressive, and he does not always fully follow the procedure. And that's actually going to cause some confusion with Admiral Thomas, I would say. Because one of the key things is these guys don't communicate that well to their subordinates. So at the start of Jutland, as we know, Admiral Hugh Gavin Thomas's forces are, part of Beatty's fleet, you could say. And the crazy thing is, in the 10 days before the Battle of Jutland even takes place, they did not meet even once. Like Admiral Tom, and because of this, Thomas does not know. Hugh Gavin Thomas does not know Beatty's style. He doesn't understand the different quirks or nuances in his command style. He, as a protege of Jackie Fisher himself, he's kind of going to follow that line, and he's more with Jellicoe, right? Like in the way. Now, one of the key things is the flags of orders. So a lot of ships have a mast. Let me just see if one of the pictures have it. Usually you'll have like on the mast over here, several flags that are raised, which will be in different sequences and colors to communicate orders, like, turn to port, turn to starboard, make this heading, etc. Now, the Royal Navy tradition at this time is the flags have to go up, be read, but only when the flag is taken down, right? After that order has been seen. Only then you are to execute said order. Beatty, on the other hand, with his aggression, he is also decisive. So as we will discuss, he's going to make quite a lot of changes in the way he's going to engage and all. But because he's not communicated this nuance, his battle cruiser captains know this. They will follow his lead. But Thomas doesn't know this. So he's like, okay, he loses precious minutes waiting for the flags to be lowered, because that's when he knows he has to follow that particular order. So this is going to be there. Now, as I mentioned a bit earlier at the start of this entire triad when Admiral Scheer took over, the British also wanted to engage with the German fleet, but they did not want to engage them at their home waters because of that giant protective minefield. So some ideas they needed to they wanted to draw them out away so that where they believe that they can engage them and defeat them with their superior ships and seamanship. Okay, because the Royal Navy at this time, they still had that Trafalgar effect, you could call it. They did not really like the blockade strategy and slow strangulation of Germany, which was, working. They're like, no, the reason Nelson won supremacy for us for like the previous 110 years was because he decided that he needs to charge at the enemy. So there's that tradition and all that they really are getting to. And at this stage of the war, even conservative commanders like Jellicoe want a decisive engagement. So it's not like just, aggressive commanders like Beatty who wanted, it's even like conservative commanders like Jellicoe that also need to do it. Now, the problem was Jellicoe vetoed a lot of ideas that were pressed forward. There were like some attacks, like, to use some pre-dreadnoughts as suicide ships, similar to what was proposed for Gallipoli, or mass destroyer attacks. However, one of the key things was any plan that was not going to be able to lure the Germans outside of the protective minefield, Jellicoe was like, yep, I'm not going to do it. And he did even send a message to the Admiralty stating that until the High Sea Fleet emerges from its defenses, I regret to say any offensive action against them is impossible. It may not be weakened, but no naval action seems practical. And he had 3 prerequisites. Fight in the North Sea, do not pursue them through the minefield, and have a concentration of force and use it. Now, this was like an important thing because of the tactics of the era, which focused more on the lines of concentration of force and sailing in line and column. So one moment. As you can see here, right, like the British are sailing in these columns. This was kind of like the strategy and doctrine of the fleets at this time, because this was like the easiest way to maneuver. And then when you know that the enemy is about to come, usually they will slow down so that the ships come into a line abreast to be able to, provide massive firepower. So, this gave them a shorter line of command, and they would also close the gap. So when they're sailing to the engagement, they might be more loosely spread out even within the column. But when you need to get ready for combat, you have to be closed up, because the idea is within a smaller area, you're going to have more guns, right? Because the biggest factor in for what fueled the arms race was the size of the guns. And one of the key other advantages was when you're sailing together, if the flagship gives you a command with its signal flags and you are in close proximity, it's easier to convey those orders without having to rely on the wireless transmitter, or more ships will be able to see it. Because keep in mind, wireless technology, it's working and using, but it's still in its infancy. It's not going to be as sophisticated or as widely used as we will see in World War II. So, it would be like, it takes time for the signals to go, especially between ships that are going to be 10 to 12 miles apart. So when the battle is joined, they will try to use similar to how, get as much firepower onto the enemy, which relied on the scouts. So the idea was cruisers and destroyers, mostly the cruisers, are going to be scouting ahead to give you the bearings, the approximate sizes of the enemy forces. The battleships and the battle cruisers are the guys that are going to be dealing out the punishments. And the destroyers and cruisers are also supposed to prevent enemy cruisers from doing the same. And then the same tactic which, Craig, we've seen at the Battle of Tsushima is still the prevailing tactic, which is crossing the T. And the idea is simple: get more firepower while the enemy cannot reply with such firepower. So, and as you will see during this battle, Jellicoe does manage to position himself twice, but Scheer also knows it and disengages twice. So now, if we get back to the map. So on the 31st of May, the German High Seas Fleet finally sails when Admiral Scheer gives out a cryptic message where he sent out a message on the night before, which was 33G-2490, which was his code that the operation is a go. And the German High Seas Fleet that he assembles is a very formidable force that is coming in. We are talking about a force of 16 dreadnought-class battleships, 6 pre-dreadnoughts, 5 battle cruisers, 11 light cruisers, and 61 torpedo boats, which to the British are just destroyers. And I did some so this gives him a grand total of 99 battleships, warships, you could say. And I made some calculations that this would be a force that displays almost 620,000 tons. Now, there were also some major news that would unfortunately come in for him. Is like the submarine force did not do any damage and had retreated because these guys were at the end of their fuel endurance. They need fuel to operate, so they withdrew. And it was never communicated to them that the departure of the fleet itself was delayed. Second was the Zeppelin air recon was not done because, as I said, just before the departure, there was really bad weather. So the Zeppelins were a no-go. And the third, probably the most controversial decision, was Scheer bringing the second battle squadron of the German Navy with him. These consisted of 6 pre-dreadnought class battleships. Now, they do have some big guns. Each of these ships have 4 12-inch guns, but their top speed is just 18 knots, which is considerably slower than the cruising speed of the battleships. Like those cruise at 21 knots. So in kilometers, it's a speed of 33 kilometers an hour to 39 kilometers an hour. That's gonna make a difference. They don't have that much armor as well. They're not as heavily armed as like the dreadnoughts, so they're not going to last. That's, people call them the 5-minute ships because that's what was the expectation, that these ships would last in a straight up capital ship dogfight. Now, what it meant was when Scheer was going to be moving north, his ships are here is like, they're sailing 15% slower than they could actually be doing because they have to reduce speed to match the pre-dreadnoughts. Now, the Room 40 had intercepted the message, and Jellicoe was alerted that the German fleet is preparing to set sail. And Craig, are you aware of that statement? Simon, also you. Are you aware of that joke that used to go around in late World War II, where it was faster for a German commander to ring up Bletchley Park to get his orders?
Yeah, I've heard that a few times.
For the Admiral Jelico was alerted to the departure of the German fleet a couple of hours before some German captains even got that order themselves. So, I guess the British have some background to move with. And Jellicoe gets it, and then like it's a mad dash in Scapa Flow. So this is actually like a picture I could just show of Scapa Flow. So you could just see like how wide was such a valuable anchorage, and like some of the facilities that are there. So it's a mad dash for the 2 hours, where the men who are on the land have to be brought back to the ships, and the ships have to hoist a flag telling Jellicoe that, yep, we're ready, boss. And there are like 2 groups coming in. So we have Jellicoe moving in from the from here of the Scapa Flow, another small squadron coming from here, and then BT's division is also ordered to raise anchor and move. Now, this is like so the Germans, as I said, with 16, I gave their force a battle, and Franz Hipper, he is given the battle cruisers and about 25 destroyers and about 6-7 cruisers. So that is his force, and the rest are going to be under Scheer's command. When Jellicoe set sail, these 2 forces from Scapa Flow and the 4th Moray, they amount to a massive 24 dreadnought battleships, 3 battle cruisers, 8 armored cruisers, and 47 destroyers. This is under Jellicoe's direct command. BT will be given 6 battle cruisers, 4 dreadnoughts, 4 super dreadnoughts, and about 30 or so destroyers. So this is like bringing him, the British, to a total of a force of 150 warships. And for my calculations of the tonnage and such, this is a force that displaced over 1.2 million tons. And from what I saw of the pre-war estimates, just like in 1914, The British total displacement was about 2 million tons. So it's like 60% of the Royal Navy is sailing here. So big concentration.
Well, the entire idea in the end of the Naval's arms race was to get 62% margins over the Germans, so it's really on point.
True. And the Brits have one other key advantage over the Germans right now is the guns. They have 160 guns in the entire fleet between BT and Jellicoe that are larger than 13.5 inches. No German gun in any of the ships exceeded 12 inches. So in terms of firepower, the British are packing more weight. Now they get through the the few submarine sightings, sorry. Because at this point, submarine warfare is still pretty new. They don't have the good ASW weapons, anti-submarine weapons that we would see deployed in World War II with the Hedgehog, ASDIC, Coastal Command aircraft, dropping bombs or depth charges.
Yeah,
So the tactic. Yes.
we need to keep in mind the first U-boats were essentially not what you would consider just to be more like a boat that can go underwater.
Yeah, they were not true submarines actually.
The guns were still on top of it, and it had to surface to fight.
Now, what Jellicoe's orders were to BT, as you can see, because of the positioning, he will take longer to reach the battle zone, was he told BT that, go 100 miles north of the Horns Reef, which is somewhere around here, and reach there by about 2 p.m. today. Okay. And then it says, if you don't see any enemies, move back up north and rendezvous with me. And then we will, hatch out a plan together basis whatever information we come. That is pretty much the orders of Jellicoe at this moment. Now, while BT is sailing, all the fleets are sailing, right? Because both fleets are divided into pretty much two groups. The battle cruiser admirals, and you could call them the overall command admirals. Jellicoe is also getting bombarded from Admiralty with a lot of wireless messages which are to give him updates. So right now he has two sources of information: any surface sightings coming from any of his cruisers or BT ships, and the Admiralty wireless intercepts. But even though they are deciphering a lot of the traffic, they can't always make sense of it. Now, one thing I did read was Admiral Scheer was given a call sign DK. All right, that was what he used. So when he gave the order to set sail, he would then, before he did that, he then transferred his call sign to actually some radio station or so that is based on the land. So it's near the Wilhelmshaven, but he's now transferred to a different call sign, which is on the fleet. Because if the wireless intercepts can pinpoint where DK is, the flagship is, you have a good idea of where a good chunk of the German fleet is going to be. So Scheer knows this. He knows that there's a chance that the radios could be intercepted. So he transfers his call sign to a radio, and then the early messages that came was an officer asks where DK is to one of the junior staff officers in the Admiralty intelligence. He says, it's in port. And this is where there was that ambiguity of communication, because to the senior officer, when he said, where is DK? He doesn't mean literally the call sign. He meant, where is Scheer right now? Right. He wants to know where the admiral and his flagship are. But the junior officer literally answered to the point that DK is over here, which means they have not set sail. So and he does get some errors in sightings, because this is obviously way before GPS. So a lot of the the plotting of the positions is done manually on charts and all. And if ships report it incorrectly, everything is, going to go miles off. So, if you take like a cascading domino effect, even with the best guesses, you might still be like a good 30, 40 miles away from each other, even though you might say you're at the right place, because ships sometimes would misidentify where they are. So if they're like at one latitude, they say they're at the other one, you will still mark to what they report. So the idea was the flagships of both navies would actually be periodically sending out messages of where their position is, so that if ships have gotten lost, the idea is everyone will congregate back around the flagship, so that even if you're in the wrong position, at least you're together. So that was one logic. Now, so the lot of the British information that they would be getting from the Admiralty would be garbage, that to the point that Jellicoe is like by the afternoon and early evening is pretty frustrated. And he, by the evening, he's just completely disregarding any message that is coming. And he's just pretty much relying on his ships and BT's positions and scouting reports. So, which is a pretty good thing. You might want to trust the guy who's actually under fire and telling positions and updates. Now, what both fleets will make the error is they underestimate how much of the other fleet has come out. Jellicoe believed that BT and him will just be facing Admiral Hipper's battle cruiser squadron. And even though he believes that BT will engage him first, he's like, with the addition of the super dreadnoughts, he's more than a match for that unit. Whereas the Germans believe they are just going to face just the British battle cruiser squadron themselves, but they're not aware of the Queen Elizabeths as well. So at 10 so when BT reaches here in the battle area at around 10 p.m., he turns north as per Jellicoe's orders. It is at that time one of his cruisers, Galatai, sends in a radio message that sees smoke and heads further south, right, to around here. And then at 2:28 p.m., it does confirm that it has reported the sighting of big smoke on the horizon, which usually was the sign of heavy capital ship presence. And about the same time as well, the lookouts on the German fleet also sight this cruiser. So both forces are now being made aware that, okay, we are near each other, we better get ready for combat. Now, this is where the communication errors pop up, because BT, moment he got the scouting report and analyzed it within the next few minutes, because he had already started his turn north, he immediately does an about face and starts to move to engage Admiral Hipper, right? So I think there's a map I have here. So he turns and heads towards the east. The problem is Admiral Thomas, he has not seen BT give the new orders and remove the flag. BT's battle cruiser captains know that once he gets an order and turns the ship into direction, even if the flag has not been removed down, which is the standard symbol from when you need to execute your order, they know they have to follow his lead. He doesn't. So at 2:32, the Queen Elizabeths are actually turning north, and then about 5 minutes later, they turn back south again to come to the aid of the battle cruisers. But what this means is there's about a 10 to 12 mile gap between BT and Admiral Thomas. It's a big gap. And at 2:35 p.m., the that cruiser, the Galatai, it does give accurate confirmation that several enemy capital ships are in the area. So now it's definitely like B2 quarters. And then BT sends a transmission at this time to Jellicoe, giving him the update. And Jellicoe, who had been cruising at a more leisurely pace at this moment, does increase speed to move into support BT. Now, as I said, the Queen Elizabeth's also started to turn, but they're still like a good distance away, 10 miles. Now at 3 p.m., BT wants to turn east and come over here, right? So that will be more closer to like Denmark and such, because his idea was if he can come there, he is going to cut off the line of retreat of the Germans and be in a perfect ambush position. However, the Germans were more further east than what he anticipated himself. So what ended up being was that at the start of the engagement, as we could see here, when we follow the light blue line and the dark red line, they're kind of parallel, ready to trade broadsides. Okay. Now, when the battle stations are sounded, the British, the experienced sailors take a lot of food, whatever food they can, to their gunnery stations. They remove as much glass as they can as well from exposed windows, because that's a pretty good idea, since they are, I guess, waiting shrapnel bombs, you could say. And in all the bulkheads and compartments, the fire hoses and pumps are made ready. Damage control parties are on the standby. And on the bridge of all the ships, the command crew, they are padded up, because there they have to keep, work with the glass, so they have a lot of extra protection. And on this day, there was like a pretty gusty 20-knot wind blowing in the North Sea chill. So you better be prepared for the cold. Now, the first ship to spot the enemy from BT was his battlecruiser HMS New Zealand. And it spotted 5 enemy ships at 3:15 p.m. And at this time, the distance between the two was about, it would be somewhere around here. They would be about 27 kilometers apart. So BT made his battle plan where, as he will go, because he has 6 battlecruisers, Hipper has 5. The first 2 ships in BT's column will engage just the first ship of Hipper's line. The third ship in BT's column will engage the second, fourth to third, and so on, so that all ships are under fire. That was his plan. Hipper, on the other hand, would be his first 4 ships will trade fire like one-on-one for each British ship in a parallel broadside, whereas the last battle cruiser is going to split its fire between ships 5 and 6 of the British line. It's not really a desirable condition for a battle, but at least they are going to keep some pressure. Now Hipper does slow down, and so that the ships bunch up together, because that means in a smaller area there are more guns. And he is reassured that even though he can beat BT on his own, but he has the knowledge that Admiral Scheer is about 50 miles to the south of this group right now, moving up with the main strength. Conversely, BT is also pretty confident that he's won at Dogger Bank. He has more battle cruisers, and he knows Jelico is about 50 to 60 miles to the north, and Admiral Thomas is going to be coming in pretty quickly with the 4 super dreadnoughts. And I think it was pretty good if they wanted an engagement that Admiral Thomas was not present immediately when these battle cruisers engaged. Because I don't think Hipper would have even bothered to come into an engagement if he sees 4 battleships with BT's battle cruiser division, because he's going to be outnumbered 2-1, and 4 of those ships can, easily wreck his entire battle line. Now, at 3:48 p.m., at about 16,500 yards, the first shots are fired between boats. Mostly these are right now at ranging shots. But the Germans start to gain the range first. Their shots start landing much closer, and soon hits are being taken to the British. So and it was also said that at this moment the British were also kind of disadvantaged because of the wind direction. A lot of the smoke that was bellowing was actually coming onto them, which kind of obscured their vision. So they are not able to gain the shots that well, which is why we would see in the opening exchange, the British were hampered. And now from 3:48 for the next 20 minutes, you have massive broadsides, because it was said both fleets are firing at their full capacity for the big guns. So we're talking about 84 massive guns, each over 12 inches, firing at full speed from all turrets for 20 minutes. It would have been spectacular and terrifying. Now, after 4 minutes, the British take their first hits with the battle cruisers HMS Prince Royal and HMS Tiger hit 3 times. And at that time, it was said Hipper was quite happy. And, that it was said that at that moment, he was just glued to his telescope, just observing the battle, sometimes shouting off orders, because, he was just kind of so engrossed with it. And this is actually from the Derflinger, which was one of the German battle cruisers. An officer gave an account of how he felt what the shells being fired. He says the shells for the British felt like, elongated black spots in the air, coming closer and getting bigger before, they crash onto the water with a terrific roar and spray. So, I mean, I would have been pretty scared. I don't know about you guys. Now, at 3:54 p.m., the battle intensity does pick up as well, because now the gap is narrowed down to about 12 to 13,000 yards. So the secondary batteries of both ships also are coming in. So these are 76 smaller guns from the Royal Navy and 96 for the Germans that come in. The British again have the kind of caliber advantage, you could call it, because their guns range from 4 to 6 inches, whereas the Germans were mostly 3.5 inch guns, and some amount of 6 inches. Now, the Germans, as I said, had the accuracy advantage, and this would force BT to start turning away. And then he makes a turn on HMS Lion, which was the flagship of BT. So one of the things is BT, he does expect all of his ships to kind of follow him in the column. And HMS Lion took it took 5 hits in 7 in a 7 minutes period, with the Seydlitz, one of its shells hitting the Q turret of HMS Lion. So the British had their turrets as A, B, Q, X from front to rear. So the B and Q, B is the front turret that is closest to the superstructure in the middle, and the Q is on the rear side, but closest to the superstructure. That turret is blown up completely. All but 2 men are killed, and those 2 are mortally wounded. And it is at that moment that one of the 2 dying men in that turret, which is a major Francis Harvey, this man here, he gives the order with his last breath to flood the magazine compartment because the magazine store is exposed and under threat. And he then succumbs to his injuries, but through his action, when the shell explodes, it does not it does not destroy like and spread throughout the ship. It actually just moves up in a huge whoosh, so it's not damaging anything more. And his single order saved HMS Lion from destruction. He was given a posthumous Victoria Cross for his heroics on this day. Now, at 4:04 p.m., the Wonder Tan, which was the last ship here, right, on beat on Hipper's line, the ship that was told to split its fire on, the two ships, and it was technically supposed by the plan to fire on the indefatigable. Okay, I screwed up the pronunciation.
No, these British ships, they're so annoying to pronounce. Inflexible, indomitable.
Indefatigable. Yeah, and HMS New Zealand, which were the last two ships of the British line. It, by Hipper's plan, was to spread the fire. It landed 3 major hits on it at 4:04, and the third shell, it, like what happened to HMS Lion, it penetrated and hit from the turret and hit the magazine. And as an officer from HMS New Zealand, which was just ahead, he said it was starting to drift and was hit on the forecastle and fore turret. And he thought the shells just exploded on impact. But 30 seconds later, the entire ship blew up. A 50-foot picket boat was blown up 200 feet, and it sank in a few minutes. And of the 1,017 men that were on her on the day of combat, only 2 were picked up by a German destroyer. And some people wondering why we might be having the magazine just under the gun. This is, I think, a good way to see where with the turret structure. We see the turret on top, which is on the deck, and then you have the magazines and shells down below, which through a system of mechanical pulleys and such, they're able to hoist them up and put them into the arming chambers here. Because these shells, they're not easy to move. They weigh if I'm not mistaken, the 15-inch shells of the Queen Elizabeth class, they weighed just under 900 kgs each. So this is kind of like pretty much, I think, Craig, if I'm not mistaken, this is what happened to the Arizona at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, it was a perfect shot yeah.
Now, BT is now moving to disengage, but because he's in utter disarray because his ships have taken a beating. His flagship has taken heavy damage. He's lost one of his battle cruisers. But it is at this moment Admiral Thomas finally arrives with his 4 Queen Elizabeths. Now, that is I'm pretty sure for the British, it's the cavalry has arrived. They start engaging with ranging shots from 19,000 yards. And then they turn down to starboard so that they are also moving parallel to the German lines. And all ships open fire with their 15-inch guns. Each broadside from Thomas's group, we're talking about 30 tons of shells flying over at one salvo. And soon the Germans start taking a broadside, a beating with the Moltke and Wonder Tan soon hit. And this forces Hipper at this point to increase speed and disengage because he knows he cannot deal anything to he's going to get out worse in this engagement. So we see the lines open up here, and because of his direction and BT's retreating from the battlefield, we are 23,000 yards, so you're now out of any even ranging shot range. So But then what turns out happens again is, as Hipper also kind of like corrects course a bit, and BT, who was also kind of retreating at a 34-degree angle, as you can see at this point here, they again come into range at 13,000 yards. So again, they start dueling with, HMS. This time the British get a bit better in the engagement. So HMS Lion and Queen Mary hit the Lutzow, which the Lutzow being the foreship of Hipper's line and his flagship, and the Sidus respectively, while the Wondertan and Molka also trading fire with the New Zealand and Tiger. With New Zealand did hit the Wondertan quite heavily, that 2 of its 4 turrets were destroyed. So it's now a compromised warship. Then at the Dunfermline, Seydlitz attacked the Queen Mary, and again, the shells penetrated at the Q turret of the Queen Mary and went into the magazine, and kaboom! Explosions rock the ship, and it tilts to the port and sinks under. And 1,266 men were lost. So BT has taken quite a beating. Couldn't resist. So, with his forces in disarray, he does order like 12 destroyers to move forward. At this time, the destroyers, their job is to lay down smoke screen when ordered, and also, try to get into torpedo range. If not, or at least stop the enemy's destroyers from launching torpedoes. And right now, the torpedo is a relatively newer weapon. It's not going to be as effective as what we would see in World War II. So yeah, we don't have like the long lance being dropped at 40,000 yards and making a successful hit. They have to be quite close. So the problem is, a destroyer doesn't want to get too close to a battle cruiser as well, because 25,000 tons versus like about 1,100 tons, not really going to work. And plus, 1 6-inch shell from the battle cruiser is enough for a destroyer. So when BT orders the destroyers to move forward, Hipper also orders his destroyers to come forward. Both launch the torpedoes. The Germans have no luck. The British at least managed to hit the Seydlitz. And it did take a lot of damage, but crucially, it did not lose speed or power. So it continued within the German line and formation. And, the Germans were not affected in speed. So it is at this point, BT does, decide that he needs to retreat. Now, when the fighting started, right, we know that the main German force under Scheer was 50 miles to the south, and Jellicoe was about 50 to 60 miles to the north. But Scheer picks up speed much more quickly. And it was at 4:46, right, well, as the action is closing around here, that the second light cruiser squadron, again under Commodore William Goodenough. Yeah, I guess he was good enough to be a Commodore. Later becomes Admiral. But he sees the main body of the German high seas fleet moving north. And, a few minutes later, he confirms it and gives contact to BT that, the main body of the high seas fleet has come, better but get out of the area. And, the signal says course of the enemy battle fleet is north, single line ahead. Composition has Kaiser class with destroyers on both wings ahead. Enemy battle cruisers joining enemy battle fleet from the north. So this radio message is pretty much given the idea of what is coming ahead. Now, what happens is, as you see at this particular line here, BT still spends a few more minutes going south. He doesn't about turn right away because he is wanting to just confirm it himself. And then once he gets it, he orders all his ships to make a succession at 16 points from starboard, basically make a 180-degree turn. But crucially, they're still going to keep their line. So they're not, all the ships are not going to turn on their axis. They're going to follow the wake of HMS Lion, BT's flagship, and take the same course. However, he does not raise the signal flags again for Admiral Thomas, who's continuing to head south as he engages with Hipper. And the only time when Thomas is made aware of BT's retreat, right, moving north to rendezvous with Jellicoe, is when they move parallel to each other with BT heading northwards and Thomas is still heading south. That's when he sees the flag and executes the order. And even after that, it was still 6 minutes after they passed when the flag was put down, the signal flag. So that is when Thomas does also, execute the turn. And if he had waited maybe a minute more, he would have been in trouble, because when Thomas makes his turn here, right, at 4M5 of the dark blue line, it is at that time the main body of the German high seas fleet was within 21 to 20,000 yards of him. They were already opening fire on him as the ships maintained their, go. And by 5:08 p.m., at least 5 German dreadnoughts are firing. He got a lucky break though, slightly, as some Germans lost their formations during some course corrections given by Scheer. So they drifted out. So it took a few minutes for them to get into order. So that allowed him to escape while only a few German guns were really in effective range. But now the Queen Elizabeths are joining the battlecruiser division in a full retreat, because they, with Scheer's force, the only thing that can protect them is Jellicoe. And it is said that during this time, between a few minutes before 5 p.m. on the 31st of May to just before 6 p.m. was the minute of their time of glory. So one officer on one of those Thomas's ships, which was the HMS Malaya, said that they could see the entire high seas fleet, that Thomas's 5th Battle Squadron, they are going to be engaging and entertaining these guys for the retreat to go on. And at this time, BT also does slow down his speed as he's retreating north for about 30 minutes. Doesn't come to a stop, just slows down, because this is to allow damage control parties to work better. Because the Lion, Tiger, and Princess Royal, so 3 of his 5 battle cruisers, were each, hit 15 times. Thomas had put his battle squadron where the two of his battleships, the Warspite and Malaya, were engaging with the main dreadnoughts of Scheer, whereas the Barberman and Valiant were engaging with these battle cruisers. Now, right now Scheer also then has Hipper join in line with him to pursue with all haste with the British, because these guys at this point believe that they're just facing 2 British squadrons. So if they can catch up and deal a blow, it's still going to be a pretty big loss to the Royal Navy. And right now it looks good for them, right? They've taken down 2 of the battle cruisers already.
I mean, this is pretty much what they want. Defeat one squadron of the British after each other, whittle them down to a manageable size.
Exactly. And because they know that, even Scheer did say that we're not going to, in a full-on fight, we're not going to get any numerical superiority. So we got to avoid that. Now, after 30 minutes, as they move, Beatty then gives the order again to his men at around 5:30 that, we have to, prepare for battle. And then he tries to cross the T as the battle cruisers move east, right? So to kind of cross the T of the Germans. And this was just like, also done with the smoke and all to mask Jellicoe's arrival. Because, right, as I said, they don't know, both fleets did not really know that, at least until this point, that their main fleets were not yet engaging. And, it is at 5:59 p.m. on the 31st of May. The vanguard of Jellicoe has arrived in battle formation to Scheer's absolute surprise.
Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it, without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video.
Just bringing up a map.
Oh yes, again, for the audience who is audio only, we have a YouTube video of this. It's probably going to be all together in one episode for this one, but we are using probably 20 plus maps, portraits of all the admirals involved, and especially for an episode like this with nearly 200 something ships going at it, it would be in your best interest to actually visually watch this to know what the hell we're talking about.
That would be a big plus since, like, the sea, the battlescape of the sea is not like land where there are definite terrain features. You could really we could just describe on the, audio, but all right. So 1916, the year of World War I, right? We have all the massive battles, and this is the biggest naval battle of the war. And it's a battle that, if you take a number of ships, is one of the biggest naval battles on the planet, when the British Grand Fleet and the German High Seas Fleet would collide, and both had the strategic objective of destroying the other completely. Germany was the only navy at this time which possibly had a chance of taking on the British and winning. I could even say that. Now, this is a massive engagement that takes place with the British bringing in 28 battleships or dreadnoughts, 9 battle cruisers, 8 armored cruisers, 26 light cruisers, and 79 destroyers for a grand total of 150 ships. The Imperial Germans in their fleet bringing in 16 dreadnoughts, 22 pre-dreadnought battleships, 5 battle cruisers, 11 light cruisers, and 61 torpedo boats for 99 ships. And I made some calculations. By tonnage, the British are bringing about 1.26 million tons of ships across like the displacement of all battle cruisers, battleships, everything. And the Germans are bringing about 620,000 tons, which by the pre-war estimates, these represent at least 60% of both fleets' total commitment. So it's a big battle. Now, ultimately, it all started with Admiral Reinhard Scheer taking command of the German High Seas Fleet, and he wanted to really engage the British and destroy them. And he planned to send a raid to, like, hit Scotland and such, and then lure the British fleet, or near the Jutland and Heligoland, because around this area, one moment, on this map, if you could see here, this mined area is what deterred the British from engaging with the Germans, because they don't obviously want to navigate a really dense minefield, which only the Germans know how to navigate, which protects themselves. And ultimately, it succeeds. On 31st May, the fleet set sail and move into the engagement. Though I'll just add, Scheer's planned torpedo and submarines attacks faltered because he sent those vessels out 2 weeks in advance, but due to unforeseen repairs and bad weather, the fleet only set sail on the 31st of May, 1916, the day the submarines literally ran out of fuel. Now, both fleets move in 2 broad groups. The commanders-in-chief, Admiral Scheer of the Imperial German Navy, and Admiral John Jellicoe of the Royal Navy, they have the primary fleet arm, which consists of like all the battleships and at least half the destroyers and cruisers. Admirals Hipper and Admirals Franz von Hipper and Admiral David Beatty, they are leading the battle cruisers divisions with pretty much the rest of the destroyers and cruisers, as well as their support vessels. So both fleets are just moving in 2 groups. And on 31st May in the afternoon, Beatty and Hipper engage in the first battle cruiser action, in which, despite being outnumbered, the British construction of their battle cruisers and their doctrine that they followed really cost them 2 battle cruisers, which were the HMS Indefatigable and HMS Queen Mary, and nearly Beatty's flagship HMS Lion, all to one shell from which just decided to explode in the magazine of the turrets. But the tide turns for Beatty is when one of the key units involved in the action, which is the 5th Battle Squadron, which was a force that ideally was supposed to be part of Jellicoe's fleet, but was detached to Beatty while Jelico was training up Beatty's gunnery officers in other battle cruisers. This force under Admiral Hugh Evans, Thomas, I keep messing that up. He has 4 powerful Queen Elizabeth class warships, which are the most powerful vessels afloat in the world at this time.
And the fastest of their, they were really fast.
They were not as fast as the battle cruisers, which could make
but I mean for those size of their ships,
yeah. But compared to any other battleship in the world, they had a top speed of 24 knots, whereas most battleships or both navies could maybe steam at about 20, 21 knots. Now, these behemoths come and they kind of like, force a lot of fire on Hipper, who then starts to retreat. Now, at the time of when BT and Hipper were fighting, Admiral Scheer is moving up because keep in mind, folks, we are talking about a battle that's taking place pre-radar. These guys don't really have accurate intel. Most of the intel is either coming from home intelligence services that is wirelessly transmitted, or their cruisers or destroyers, which, while not engaging, would be, on scouting duties to alert the main bodies of the fleet. And as you can see here, on 31st May at 4:42 p.m., BT confirms the sighting, which was reported 10 minutes ago by his cruisers, of Admiral Scheer coming through. And now this is including like 22 battleships, about 8 cruisers and 40 destroyers, and he's already down 2 battle cruisers. He retreats. And because of differences in command style, Admiral Thomas's 5th Battle Squadron brings up the rear, and they start retreating north, which is where Jellicoe's fleet will be coming in. And just around 6 p.m., they do they get sighted, and even BT at that moment, who had already paused in that run up north to lay down smoke screen and make repairs, he actually turns to the right and starts sailing east because his battle cruisers do let out a lot of smoke. And where we left off is at that moment, the front ships of Admiral Scheer, they sight Jellicoe's battle fleet moving in formation because he's organized his ships ready for action. And it's going to be quite scary. It's like that scene from Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, when the British fleet just comes out. But if you just imagine 28 dreadnoughts coming your way, yeah, that's pretty scary if you ask me.
It's a pretty good analogy.
I mean,
Just with
I'd
the
be pretty scared.
bigger ships.
I'd be pretty scared. I don't know about you guys. Now, one thing we should also keep in mind with Jutland, right, is it's a naval battle, right? Now, generals on the land, if they make a mistake or such, they have to plan a proper withdrawal, and also are obsessed about holding land, right? Like that is exactly why we had the entire stalemate on the Western Front and the Isonzo fronts. Simon, we should probably play someday again, go picking.
Yeah.
But on the sea, that dynamic completely changes. It's a featureless landscape. There are no mountains, there's no hills, there's no ravines, rivers to demarcate zones. So if a guy just doesn't want to fight, he can just, freely disengage more easily than it is to extract a few divisions of soldiers, right? But one of the biggest problems that was on this day was the visibility. Here, both ships, their big guns can engage each other at ranges of 10 to 11,000 yards effectively, or even up to 13, 14,000 yards, and ranging shots even start at 80,000 yards. The visibility at this time, at around 6 p.m. on 31st May, was limited to about 5,000 yards. So this is going to be one of the big reasons that a lot of decisions that Scheer and Jellicoe make, it's going to be affected by this fog of war. Now, at around 6 p.m. when Jellicoe is starting to arrive, the 5th Battle Squadron and BT, right, as you can see here, these blue lines, they start to turn to re-engage with the Germans. So from about 4:45 p.m., those guys were running north to rendezvous with Jellicoe, and now that they're ready. Now, and it is also at the same time the scouting Hipper's battle cruisers, which because right now it's only been really the battle cruisers that have been doing the fighting. And despite not yet losing a ship, Hipper's ships have taken a pretty brutal beating. I think a few of them were even at one point, uh, I think it was the Sidelets, I think, which had only just one operational turret left at this point. And it had already taken on like, a few thousand tons of water. So it's not like they've escaped completely unscathed as well. Now, at around 6 p.m., as Jellicoe, you can see, is entering, Hipper does turn back to join with Scheer. And, that is when at 6 p.m., BT in his ship HMS Lion, which is his flagship, he sights the Iron Duke, which is Jellicoe's flagship. Iron Duke being named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, which I'm quite proud to say is the founder of my college, King's College, London. Now, the reason Jellicoe was approaching pretty slowly was he had been demanding updates from BT about the position of the enemy. This is because a foul up in the intelligence that was sent wirelessly from the Admiralty to Jellicoe earlier in the battle, which is proven false, it completely destroyed the trust that Jellicoe would have in such reports. So he was relying on BT and the cruiser captains and such to give him all the sighting information so that they can then plot their course. So because of this and the limited visibility, he is he doesn't know what to really do. And he wants to know the location of the German fleet because what he wants to do is come in a battle line crossing their T, right? So that he is able to deliver broadsides what the Germans are not able to, and also cut off their retreat, because at this point also they have several options on how they could disengage, and if they reach back to the safety of their minefields, he's not going to pursue them any further. However, if he deploys his fleet too early, and it's in the wrong direction, he's compromised. But if he continues in a sailing formation, he's not, fully ready to commit. So, it's this big juggling act that they have to take. Now, what ends up happening is he is moving in a southerly direction. And then as he's moving down, right, he does see that BT and the Queen Elizabeth, the British 5th Battle Squadron under Evan Thomas, are already now engaging with the vanguard of Scheer's fleet. Now, and these two guys do try to take position at the head of Jellicoe's fleet so that they are again the vanguard. And now we see a case of classic miscommunication happening. Evan Thomas assumed that as Jellicoe comes south, his fleet would move to come down and turn to starboard. That is, they will turn in a westerly direction, and then he will be in the lead. But what ends up happening is Jellicoe turns to the port side and moves in a more easterly direction, which also then, puts him at the rear guard. And at the same time, not all the ships are completely receiving the messages that, okay, this is the turn we have to execute. And they're not turning in unison. So that leads to a slowdown in speed because they're trying to avoid not ramming into each other. Keep in mind, while there are like 30, 35 capital ships of the British, there are also like 120 smaller ships darting around between them. Not good for them. Now, it is at this time the 5th Battle Squadron does take a bit of a blow, is when HMS Warspite is turning in, because she's bringing up the rear of the 5th Battle Squadron line. She gets hit by a shell, which jams her rudder, and for a good amount of time, she is actually just going to be turning in circles. It's not going to be visible on this map, just that one ship's decision and one ship's movements. But Captain Phillip's Philpotts decided to maintain course, right? Because he doesn't want to stop the warspite. He wants to continue. So it takes two, turns in a circle before they got her under control. But at this time, she was the main target for the Germans, and they hit her several times.
We also have to keep in mind that the rudders are like one of the key weaknesses of these ships. So if you hit the rudder and it stops moving, you cannot do anything because you lose control of your movement.
That is why, but he wanted to at least keep moving, Captain Philpotts, sorry, so that at least it's a moving ship is at least a bit, even if it's moving in a circle, is a bit harder to hit than a stationary
standing
ship.
still is makes you a far easier target than moving, even if it is predictable.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, there was a British armored cruiser that had just been hit earlier, the cruiser Warrior, and it had been damaged by the leading dreadnoughts, and they actually believed that Warspite was doing this deliberately to save the ship, and they were like, the crew felt a great deal of gratitude and debt to Warspite, and so the the rangefinders could only use the A turret of Warspite. So British turrets at this time on the capital ships were labeled as A, B, Q, and X. A is the foremost, B is behind, so they are the front of the ship, right? The four. Then you'll have the main superstructure, then you have the Q turret, and then you have the X turret. At this time, Warspite was so badly damaged, only the A turret was functioning. And then I think it was around 6:45 or so that they regained control. And despite their captain and crew wanting to stay in by, they were down to speed that they were ordered out of the battle zone. And by 9 p.m., Warspite was gone. So one of the Queen Elizabeths has been knocked out of the fight, but it's not going to sink, and we do know she's going to serve in World War II. So it's not really a spoiler, but she's not one of the ships that's going to be lost. Now, at 6:17, Jellicoe's fleet finally sights here, and they open fire somewhere around at a distance of about 15,000 yards. It was the HMS Marlborough, which was the first British dreadnought to open fire on Scheer's fleet, named after Winston Churchill's great ancestor, the Duke of Marlborough. Now, however, at this point, because of the confusion and the maneuvering and low fog, only 1/3 of the British ships are even able to see and fire on the German fleet. And this is made worse because, as you can see in this light blue line over here, because BT is trying to get across and be at the vanguard of Jellicoe's line, the smoke coming out of several cruisers and battle cruisers, it's adding to the fog of war. And this actually forces Jellicoe to make the decision that his fleet should slow down to 14 knots. So I think 14 knots, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is a speed of about 26 kilometers per hour. Now, it's quite slow, and only some of the ships get that order from Jellicoe that, slow down. So there ends up being a lot of maneuvering and near crashes per down. Now, it is at this moment we have the British 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron come in. And this is part of Jellicoe's fleet. Now, why does Jellicoe have 3 battle cruisers? It was a decision made prior to the war where, in exchange for Queen Elizabeth of the 5th Battle Squadron, the battle cruisers of BT would move up to Scapa Flow and use the gunnery ranges there to better hone their skills because they had better facilities to train the men better. Now, This battle cruiser squadron of 3 battle cruisers, which are the indefatigable. Sorry, I think I mixed up the names. Just one moment. Yeah, it is the battle cruisers HMS Invincible, Inflexible, and Indomitable. You gotta really like these British names, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I know. The British are such trolls with the way they name their ships.
And this is a guy that actually does have a slight relation. So this is Rear Admiral Sir Horace Lambert Alexander Hood, who also gets the nickname the Horn Horace Hood. He is actually from a pretty distinguished naval family. His great-great-grandfather was Admiral Lord Samuel Hood, who served the Royal Navy from the 7 Years' War right up to like the Siege of Toulon and commanded the Mediterranean fleet at that time. So he also in 1793 had HMS Victory as his flagship, Craig. So I mean, just like I really like these long traditional families that are serving, and that is a family where Hood's younger brother also reached the rank of Vice Admiral, and a cousin also reached the rank of Admiral. Now, anyways, these 3 battle cruisers decide to come in, and he, noticing what BT and Jellicoe and Scheer are also trying to do, he moves his ships across the line, as you can see here, to get onto the vanguard and be the actual leads. And at this moment, they engage the Lutzow and Deflinger, 2 battle cruisers which have already been pretty battered, with Lutzow being the flagship of Admiral Hipper. They are freshly trained, they have much better gunnery, and they're engaging at 9,000 yards. And with the damage that they're beating, it's at this point the Lutzow is made completely inoperable. It doesn't sink yet. Okay, I think I just gave that away now. I'm sorry, but its bow was so low in the water that it is pretty much just like, almost submerged. That's the amount of damage the Lutzow took, which actually would cause Hipper to get out of the battle for a few hours, because he would board with the damage and the loss of its communications. Hipper would leave the Lutzow at around 6:30. He would board a destroyer and transfer to the Malta on one of his battle cruisers. Simon, I think you'd like the person for who that ship is named after. But
yeah, the absolute genius that is Moltke.
The
And
Elder.
always remember, it's named after Moltke the Elder, not the Younger. Never
course.
confuse them. Never.
But because of subsequent maneuvering, which I will discuss, he is not going to be able to board the Malta from the destroyer till like 10 o'clock at night. So for about 4 hours, he's not going to be, playing any role in the battle. And however, these 2 ships, even though they are pretty badly damaged, they decide to fire on Admiral Hood's flagship, the Invincible. And the Invincible is a pretty ironic name now. That's all I'm going to say. Once again, the fire from the Lutzow, a 12-inch shell hits the Q turret of Invincible. The shell penetrates and goes into the magazine below the turret, and well, kaboom. And I think this is a good, like, if you can see this GIF and animation I found, it gives an idea of how these turrets fire and where their magazine and powder is. So they're right below the turret to obviously facilitate the movement of the shells and such. So if you can imagine like a 12-inch shell hitting this magazine, well, I think that's also what happens to the Arizona, Craig.
Yep, one of the most catastrophic hits in the history of naval warfare.
Yeah. But ironically, the
I hate that one too. That's the worst.
Yeah. Indefatigable and the Queen Mary, the other two battle cruisers that had been lost, they were practically lost to the same reason.
Yeah, it's almost identical.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, and
no,
those who listened or watched the last episode also noticed, like how I mentioned that the same thing happened to the German in a previous battle, and because of that they fixed this, which is why it's not as much happening to them.
I do plan to actually get into the doctrine of the ships, Simon. It's a point I do have to make, but I think I'll get that into the end when the inquests and all were done in the aftermath. But yeah, going into the Q turret, HMS Lion nearly even suffered that same fate of that one tower shell blowing it up, but Major Francis Harvey ordered the magazine compartment to be flooded with his dying breaths so that the force of the explosion went upwards and not through the ship horizontally,
And they pretty
which
much
ensured
they conclusively proved if he didn't do it in the timely fashion he did, it would have absolutely exploded.
that three dead battle cruisers definitely agree with you, Greg.
Yeah.
So what, according to the reports that Welland shell, when the Q turret exploded, the explosions also went and rocked the A and X turrets. So the foremost and aftmost turrets. The ship was was split in half, and only 6 men of its 1,032 men survived. Admiral Hood was not amongst them, the survivors. And the funny thing is, it did not actually even sink to the bottom. So the reason is HMS Invincible, it kind of almost broke in half. And it's a ship that's almost 600 feet long. And the sea at this point the North Sea, the depth is about 180 feet or so. So it's still sticking out like two prows, the wrecks of the ship. However, the Lhasa, it did put in the last blows that would destroy the Lhasa, forcing it scuttling much later on. Now, at this time, as Scheer is moving up, right, he doesn't know what's going on because Admiral Scheer in his flagship, just gonna tell you, he was I don't know what. Do you know what ship he was on? Oh yeah, it's called the Friedrich der Gross, which was the Kaiser class dreadnought. Sorry. Now that ship was 13th in the line. So they're moving in a single column line. He's 13th. If you consider the number of capital ships that the Germans have brought forward, that's kind of in the middle, if you include the battle cruisers. And as one of his lieutenants would quote right after the war, Scheer said the lack of information meant that Scheer had the foggiest idea of what is happening right now. Typical naval battles.
Literally the foggiest.
For the audio
As I said,
listeners, if you were looking at the full map of the battle, it really does appear as if the Germans are just freaking out and making dramatic turns whenever the enemy gets too close.
that's pretty much actually what both try to do,
Yeah.
like when they want to engage or disengage. But because of this fog of war, right? There's established doctrinal decisions that most of these guys would follow, and that's how that kind of makes their decisions a bit easier. Now, the thing is, the ships around Scheer, they know that they are engaging the British, but they are actually in the disadvantageous position because the fog and smoke is blowing in their direction, which hampers their visibility anymore. They are maybe able to see some muzzles flashes of the British at best, but the British at least have better visibility on them, so they are able to, drain more accurate fire at this moment. Not like it's super effective, but you don't want to really fight an enemy who are able to shoot back at you better than you are able to return fire. Now it is at around here, right, where you see the number 3, this is now about 6:35 p.m. He decides to break off contact, reassess the situation, and then decide. So he sends out an order, battle about turn to starboard, which means all ships where they are at that position in the water are gonna turn 180 degrees from their starboard angle and start their retreat to disengage and move in a westerly direction. So he's not following how the British retreated, where they they still maintained their line formation. Every ship turned at their same moment. And it was one of the most well executed maneuvers of this battle because the British don't even know what happened. And at 6:36, the leading British ships and Jellicoe, they're like, where did the leading German ships disappear? They had no idea that they had broken off, and even half of the British dreadnoughts had not yet even seen the enemy. They knew there was firing, but they had themselves not seen anything. And he is going to continue moving in this easterly direction. He does not want to turn to that westerly direction, which some might have reported, because he felt that he's going to move into a trap. He wants to go in this east and then turn south, so that at least he's going to fall back in between the Germans and the line of retreat to their home ports at Wilhelmshaven. And at this moment, HMS Marlborough does hit a torpedo or a mine. It's never really been determined what, and really caused that damage. And this was the only dreadnought damage that I think Jellicoe does suffer till this point. So the only time a British dreadnought got damaged right now. Now, it's important to note that the Marlborough is now going to drift from like the front of the vanguard, like the British force, to the rear. In the night action, it could have made a big difference. Now, at this moment, the British are moving in a southerly direction now at a speed of about 17 knots. And, they're just moving without much intel. Now, Scheer maintains that 180-degree turn and heads west for 20 minutes before he gives the exact same order once again. So they've just made an about turn again, and they're now sailing into the British Grand Fleet. Now, why does he do it? No idea. I don't think he even really knew it himself. Because according to one of his writings in the aftermath, they say he wanted to deal a blow to the center of the enemy. And also another report, when he was questioned by Kaiser Wilhelm, he was saying it was too early to assume the night cruising formation orders, and the enemy could have sailed and cut us off before dark and forced us into an engagement, or they could snap away the initiative from us. And then he said, cut off our retreat. So he said the only way we could have done this is to advance against the main force, regardless of the cost, and deal a big blow to them. And even this time, not only just engage with the capital ships, but even bring the cruisers and destroyers into the action. So, maybe they can deal out a big punishment. And another reason was he said that at the time of this first turn here, one of the German light cruisers, Wiesbaden, had been disabled by a British shell. So he wanted to about turn the entire fleet to rescue that one ship. That is another reason that was postulated. I think the reality is he just also did not probably know why he did this. Again, a lot of this.
Well, if he did decide to save that one ship, that's I would call that a cost-effective way of saving stuff.
But he does also admit after the war he doesn't have any real objective. But it was said, like, these guys at this time, because this is, I think, the first time intelligence, wireless are also kind of like, having an input into the thought process of the admirals. But given this is a like very nascent technology, there's no radar to really even determine the position. A lot of these guys are just going to go with you just call it like their gut feeling and their personalities. An aggressive commander will always go for the hunt. A cautious commander might want to assess before they commit to any course of action. Now, again, when they make this turn by 7:04 p.m., the Germans were inside of the British, and the Germans were sighted by the British. I'm sorry, and you have the HMS Revenge, HMS Neptune, Agincourt, and Saint Vincent. 4 dreadnoughts decide to greet the German battle line with broadsides. It's pretty good welcome. And for the audience to remember, the British have the bigger guns here. No German gun was over 12 inches in caliber, whereas the British capital ships, they were like pretty much 13 and 14-inch guns. So they do pack a bigger punch. And at 7:05 p.m., so 1 minute after the sighting, Jellicoe does order the ships to start turning to engage the enemy. But, it wasn't in a full battle line, because he just wants to get all of his ships to fire. Because at the current formation, not all of them were able to, land, to even train their guns on the Germans. So to the captains, right, they might just see that, oh yeah, there's just maybe a couple of ships. Maybe it's a squadron, maybe it's a lower. It's not the main fleet. They don't know that. And again, Jellicoe's fault is he's operating like Scheer, right? He's operating on what he is getting intel, what he thinks makes sense, and his own, gut feelings and standard procedures that were developed by the Royal Navy and such. And I think for the next 10 minutes or so, here is when Scheer decided to break away for good, because the British guns were really putting a number onto the German high seas fleet, and they were not able to fire back for once effectively. And Scheer gives 3 orders. I'm going to list them in the sequence. All the dreadnoughts were to turn away from the British battle line in a battle turn. Second, the battle cruisers, regardless of losses, have to charge straight at the British. And the third is a mass destroyer torpedo attack. What do you think was the most surprising order of the day? I'd like you guys to just tell me.
Well, I think those battle cruisers are going to have an eventful time.
Though most likely very short.
I was also like, you don't realize these guys have already taken a pretty brutal beating. Maybe give them a little bit of a breather.
And the Germans hold the advantage going in closer, technically.
They do.
I mean, their gunnery has actually proven itself in the first action with the battle cruisers, at least.
True, it does. And the 4 battle cruisers, which were under the command of the Derflinger's captain, Johannes Hartog, right? He was the designated leader of the battle cruiser division, because of these maneuvers, right? Hipper, who had already moved his flag from Lutzow and was trying to get to the Malka, he's now on a destroyer that is just kind of like, reacting to Scheer's maneuvers. So the 4 battle cruisers, they move forward at a speed of 20 knots, which, considering the battered state, is pretty impressive. Now, the Derflinger, it took a massive hit on one of its turrets, its D turret, and the British ship was about to explode in the magazine. But as Simon pointed out, the Germans had already learned from that mistake, and they had fire doors, which immediately shut and took a lot of the punch out of that shell explosion and ensured the Derfflinger was not going to go to the bottom of the North Sea. And I think the Queen Mary, Invincible, Indefatigable are probably like, wincing in their watery ship graves. Now, but luckily for these battle cruisers, they only had to charge forward for about 4 minutes. Around 7:17, 7:18, they do get the order to retreat. But they did take a pretty brutal punishment. In that 4 minutes that they were charging, each of the battle cruisers took at least 5 hits with the Derfflinger, taking almost 20 hits. But none of them sank, which really, you got to give it as a testimony to the Germans for their engineering, to make these ships so survivable.
I don't know if we mentioned this in the first episode, but one of the major differences between the British and the German battle cruisers is the Germans favored a bit more armor, whereas the British, yeah.
Yeah, I actually wanted to bring that up maybe towards the end when the inquests were made into what all went wrong. So I did plan to bring it up then. But yes, you are correct, Greg. They had a completely different philosophy in their battle cruiser designs. Now, the withdrawal was successful thanks to an attack by 14 destroyers charging forward. And each of these destroyers were moving forward at 30 knots, and these 14 destroyers each drop at least 2 torpedoes. So 31 torpedoes are now charging at Jellicoe's main battle line. And it's at this point, I'm going to take a bit of time to just explain, where one of the most criticism is levied at Jellicoe. First and foremost, anti-submarine weapons and torpedo weapons do not exist. So the idea is, if you see a torpedo, the ships have to just turn either into the torpedo or away from it. The idea is so that your broadside is no longer visible to the torpedo. You're presenting your bow or your stern. And Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was still a very valid tactic that many Pacific War destroyers and cruiser commanders would still try to do.
It's the same thing I do in World of Warships.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much. There you go, folks. We have practical experience backing it. But the idea is you turn into or away, present your stern or bow so that the idea is smaller target, chances of missing are low. Now, there are some pros and cons of this decision, which I think we should discuss. These torpedoes would have probably been launched and are going into the water at a speed of at least 35 to 40 knots, right? Because since they are going to be launched, they were launched at a range of just 10,000 yards or so, which was at that time more the extreme range for torpedoes. It's fair to assume they would have been closer to their maximum speed. And World War I torpedoes had a speed of 29 to 44 knots. If you turned into the torpedo while moving, the closing speed is going to be the speed of the torpedo plus your own speed. Now, it'll take time. You're reducing the amount of time for the events of happening of someone to spot the wakes of the torpedoes, assess it, relay that information to the captain and the navigators, let them make the decision, and correct the moment of the ship, because these ships don't turn like on a dime. And then also give a bit of time to pray that the torpedo doesn't hit you. But if you turn away, the net closing speed is the difference between your speed and the torpedo, because the torpedo has to play catch up. You're moving in the same direction. It gives you more time to prepare a dodge. And however, by turning away, which is the decision that Jellicoe made, he would lose contact with the retreating German high seas, the German fleet, high seas fleet. And he's been criticized that he's not pursuing aggressive enough. But considering that if they were turning into the torpedoes, you're having a closing speed of maybe 55 to 60 knots. So, your rate of closure is like, 100 to 110 kilometers an hour.
And you're making it easier for the effective range of those torpedoes to hit you because, like you
Exactly.
said, that at that range, it was pretty extreme. They were gonna be lucky if they got hits.
But
Yeah.
if they would turn away, the effective closing speed of the torpedoes is now 15 to 20 knots. So it's about 27 to 37 kilometers an hour. Still, they're going to catch up, but you have way more reaction time. Now, this turn, right, he gets a lot of criticism in the post-battle analysis, but it was the sanctioned, approved move of every navy that when facing the torpedo threat is to turn away. Give yourself more time to, react. Better to lose contact with the enemy than, uh, you know, lose ships for no reason.
We
Especially if you're
also
the
have
larger
to,
force.
yeah, and we also have to keep in mind these are really early torpedoes, so there's a very high chance that they actually fail. So the longer time they have to impact and fail, some of them might just not be exploding anymore or just sinking.
And the only reason you could really even point out why he's criticized for not turning into the torpedoes, right, and giving him and his men much less reaction time is it's not very British. It's not the Nelson way. It's not very aggressive. Like, guys, Shear's already departed, right? Like, he's already broken off contact for a few minutes. So he's already gained some time on you. What is the point of just unnecessarily sacrificing your warships for this? And Craig, I think we can attest to this from Trafalgar and Nile videos. Nelson, while he was very aggressive, he made pretty calculated risks. Aggressive,
Yeah.
ballsy, but it wasn't, I wouldn't call it reckless. He knew what he was doing, he understood the risks, and it paid off. But it's not like he's just blindly charging into danger.
Risking dreadnoughts through a fan of torpedoes would have been stupid. Yeah.
And he did what was expected and approved of every level of the Admiralty or any Navy, right? To turn away to when presenting your bow to and stern to the torpedo. So I also agree that this was the completely correct decision for him to do this. There'll be times where you'll be needing to sacrifice the ships, but you don't need to take that unnecessary ship loss chance.
So
Because
as you were with the cowardly Jellicoe.
yeah. Now, it's hindsight is 2020. I know that's why people were blaming him because they know how the sequence goes and they're like, oh yeah, you should have turned in. You would have done it. It's kind of like I remember once in a Discord chat, one person was telling me that how he's a greater commander than Napoleon because he would do exactly what Napoleon should have done because, hindsight is 2020. Really great general, Craig.
Yeah.
But at this point, after the turn is completed, like the torpedoes go, the British are sailing south, but the nearest German ship is now at a distance of 12 miles or 21,000 yards. And the problem is it's now past 8 p.m. They get a sighting of the ship, but they know they can't engage them in the daylight hours anymore because by about 9 o'clock in the North Sea at this time of year, darkness falls. But they do still continue the pursuit. They're not giving up. Now, right now, as we see, the Germans are retreating more in a southwestern direction, and Jellicoe is kind of going in a southeasterly direction. Now, Jellicoe at this moment, he does feel that he's in a commanding position, but he doesn't want to risk a night engagement. But I don't know if but at this moment, it's also known that he is unaware that Warspite has left the battle and BT was beaten up by Hipper earlier in the day and lost 2 battle cruisers. He just knows that he's lost the Invincible. That's pretty much from Jellicoe's point of view right now. He just thinks he's a battle cruiser down. Now, what he says is there are about 3 routes that Admiral Scheer could take to get back, right? Because what he needs to do is get in within this, mined area. Because after that, Jellicoe is not going to pursue them. And he categorically has told the Admiralty, you're going to be absolute idiots if you want me to pursue them through this area. So one idea was Scheer can kind of from his position go southeast to the Horn Reef and then just move south to the harbor at Wilhelmshaven. Another was to go towards Ems and then turn east and move past and to the east to the harbor. And the third was to go to the Heligoland and again then turn back east. So those are kind of like more of his routes. So Jellicoe assumed because he knows that Scheer's already gone off in westernly direction to him, that it's better if Jellicoe is going to move south, right? Because he's already blocking his view for the first route, which is through the Horns Reef, where Scheer would have to go southeast, and he can at least move to cut him off from the other 2 routes as well. He sends out some preparationary orders. He categorically stated that we are not going to fire and fight them at the night. He said, and it was well known by both navies that the Germans were the superior night fighters on the ships. Greg, I guess it's kind of like Japan versus America in the Pacific in the early part of the war.
It's a similar situation where the Japanese perceive that they'll be numerically inferior. So the Germans, obviously, they think the same thing. So how could you tip the balance? Something like night fighting might help you. Yeah.
True. And the German advantage came from they emphasize more training in nighttime conditions, so the crews were better accustomed to it. And the spotting lights and equipment that they had were far superior to what the British had. And it was known by both navies, which is why Jellicoe really did not want to engage. And considering he did not get much criticism for this particular decision, I guess people also knew that. And Jellicoe also switches his formation from, 1 battle line to 3 columns of 8 ships, each a mile apart. And again, BT, because he needs to be first, he moves ahead. And the men are still kept at their action stations. So these guys have been on, their war stations since like, 2:30 p.m. But luckily they do get like sandwiches and hot cocoa sent to their turrets and stations. So I would be pretty happy at least with that. Now, it's also this time Scheer decided that he's going to go for the first. He's going to go past the Horns Reef, so the first route. So he will start turning and moving, to in a southeasterly direction. Let me see if I have that. Sorry, I don't think I have that much of a map here. It's not really covered. But what you can just imagine is the British, if you can just imagine a V, right? The British are one arm of the V, moving slower but have a big head start. And they are moving from like east to the southwest, from the eastern side to the southwest. The Germans are moving a bit faster in the night, and they are moving from the west to a southeasterly direction. And there's going to be like, that at the point where the V meets, that's also going to be an interception point for them. And he's maintaining a fleet speed of about 16 knots, and he just wants to hope he can slip past the British and just get back to their ports, but he is also prepared for nighttime action. And his orders are quite clear, like, we'll try to slip past, but men to be ready at their action stations to fight their way out if needed. But at all costs, these guys have to keep moving. Do not stop. Keep moving. Keep the momentum. Now, at 10:41 p.m., Jellicoe gets a message from room 40. So room 40 is an intelligence room in the Admiralty which decrypts and deciphers the German wireless communication. But because of a foul up in the reports that they gave Jellicoe, like, at around 2 p.m. on the 31st of May, so about 10 hours ago, he doesn't really have much faith in their credibility. And this dispatch, had told him that ultimately did tell that the Germans are moving in a southeasterly direction and would be behind him. But because of the lack of trust, he's like, yep, I'm not believing this crap. And one very important report that was decrypted was Scheer did ask for around here Zeppelin coverage to be provided. So some sort of preliminary air cover. That particular report is not even forwarded to Jellicoe. Because maybe that could have, if you kind of get that info that if the enemy admirals ask for air cover, then maybe that is where he's really going. Might have maybe been able to convince him to believe the reports, but we don't know for sure, right? Because the trust was broken. Now, at night, we don't have radar, right? So how do they identify the ships? When a ship sees another ship, they'll flash a prearranged signal, and a fixed return signal has to be given. If it's received correctly, okay, that's my bro from the same navy, or that's the enemy shoot. Now, the problem is all of this is to be given by and then you have to find the ship and illuminate it. All the ships have pretty good spotlights, as you could see here in this image, right? Like they are like these solid beams, but the problem is if you show your own light, well, you're going to get hit. So the idea was to have a small beam only. And the problem is some of the Germans actually quickly memorized the first couple of sequences of the British IFF, the recognition signals, and we're going to use it later in the battle at night. So, as I already mentioned, they have better training and better spotlighting equipment. So at around midnight, some of the destroyers which were at the rear guard of the British formation, they would encounter the leading elements of the German Navy. They flash their, the signal for requests, so that they can confirm if it's a friend or foe. And the Germans just recognize that the signal that was flashed, it's not their recognition signal. So these are not our guys. What do? Open fire. And this group of about 8 destroyers was attacked by 3 battleships and 3 cruisers. And this ship, right, which was the HMS Tipperary, seems, this destroyer got the most, I would say definitely the most brutal punishment of any ship. This ship was hit by 150 6-inch shells in a few minutes.
Talk about overkill.
Kind of like the Death Corps. But yeah, she would go down with 150 of her men. Now, the only tactic these torpedo destroyers have is fire torpedoes and engage. And instead, what happens is during the action, one of the other destroyers, this is just like an image I'm just sharing of the night fight, was the destroyer Spitfire. It was rammed by the Nassau. The Nassau being the first German dreadnought, might add. And despite being rammed and scraped against the body, it was at least spared the abuse of the main German guns of the Nassau because it can't, traverse down low enough to actually fire. And despite being rammed, this ship manages to survive, being smashed by a battleship. So, like, destroyers are about 1,500, 1,600 tons, and the battleships are exceeding 22,000 tons. It managed to limp back to UK after 36 hours of sailing at 6 knots.
They lost the opportunity for a good old-fashioned boarding action.
Yeah.
If it was the Russians, it would have been super effective. And it was at also at the British, the other 5 destroyers, they fired about 8 torpedoes and all missed. And at this moment, the HMS Black Prince, which is the light cruiser, moves over to the commotion, flashes the signals, and did not respond. And well, at 1,000 yards, it was illuminated by the German capital ships, and well, it went down with all hands. But ultimately, they were not too strategically decisive victories for the Germans because it's not really affecting the British Grand Fleet's capabilities. And the funny thing is, HMS the British were aware that they are being attacked by capital ships, and they had ships to respond. So when I mentioned the HMS Marlborough, one of the dreadnoughts that had taken a hit and from a mine or a torpedo and had to slow down to 17 knots, it was nearby at this particular moment to help. And because it was being supported by its division, right? Because it was the flagship of the 6th Battle Division. It had HMS Revenge, Hercules, and Agincourt also with it, right? So the rest of its division was there. And you also had the 3 5th Battle Squadron battleships also there, right? We're talking about the Barham, Valiant, and Malaya. So you had 7 dreadnoughts there, including the 3 super dreadnoughts. And they did absolutely nothing. And the reason was HMS Malaya cited the engagement, but it did not report it to Jellicoe. What Admiral Hugh Thomas Evans said, that he assumed Jellicoe had already got the information and we don't need to forward extra information to him, and we do not want to give away our position with a wireless transmission for no use. That is what was he said. And he says, it was an error in judgment, but it was not neglect. This is what Hugh Gavin Thomas would say after the battle about this particular decision. So yeah, the British missed an opportunity that they could have actually turned and engaged. And at 2 a.m., another group of British destroyers will engage Scheer. And at least these 6 destroyers managed to get out 17 torpedoes. So yeah, they were more effective. They would only, hit just one ship, which was the German pre-dreadnought Pommern, or one of the 5-minute ships, as they were called. And she would be the only, you could say, like major battleship class vessel that was sunk. And, a lot of officers at that time, lieutenants and all, they were pretty surprised why Jellicoe did not even want to go and engage. And it is after this action with this last destroyer group that, Scheer does cross through the minefield. So he allows the battered battle cruisers to move in first, followed by the 5-minute pre-dreadnoughts, and then the rest of the battle fleet goes through. Right. Because it's also at this time that the Lutzow has been scuttled, because she had taken over 8,000 tons of water by now. So no, they knew she's not going to make it back. And then, when the sun also came up and the British were still in pursuit, visibility had even dropped from about 5,000 yards to around 4,000 yards. And then they knew they reached near the minefields, and Jellicoe felt like, the threat from the minefield and ambushing destroyers was too great for him to take. And he would then turn north on the morning of the 1st of June, find survivors from the wrecks of the other ships, bury their dead in the sea, because that is the Royal Navy tradition, and then went home. And that brought an end to the Battle of Jutland. Now, if you were to take stock of casualties and such, the Germans suffered 3,058 casualties. And amongst this, they did lose one battle cruiser, the Lutzow, one pre-dreadnought, the Pommern, 4 light cruisers, and about 5 to 6 destroyers. This was a total sinking tonnage of about 62,300 tons of ships, which was about 10% of the tonnage that was committed to this entire battle. The British suffered over 6,768 casualties, the loss of 3 battle cruisers, the Queen Mary, my favorite ship, which I just cannot pronounce properly, the indefatigable, invincible, 3 cruisers, which included the, Black Prince, and 8 destroyers. In terms of shipping tonnage, that was about 113,000 tons of ships that was sunk, which represented 9% of the committed, tonnage to this battle. Now, it was ultimately still the only decisive engagement was with the battle cruisers. Now, when they came back, there's going to be a big war discussion about this battle. You could really say that Scheer, Jellicoe, and Beatty, none of these particular admirals won anything. It was really Hipper, you could say, that was really a victor, right? Because he engaged Beatty with an inferior force and, did inflict massive casualties. But you could see, while it was you could call it a tactical German victory at best, it is still a strategic loss for them, because the German high seas fleet is never going to come back. Even though they did not lose as many ships, the capital ships took a beating from the British. And they're going to be confined to the dry docks for many, many months. So the effective combat strength of the German high seas fleet has gone down. Whereas for the British, when they limped back to their ports, all the ships that were damaged or lost were pretty much already having same caliber replacements already waiting to just step in. So within a week or so after Jutland, the British strength is practically the same, even if you account for the ships that are going on to the dry dock for repairs. This is just like that industrial power of Britain that Germany could just never match.
Yeah,
and by the end of the war,
we also have to keep in mind that the Germans needed a victory. The British, they are totally fine, essentially, with a tie. They are in control right now. The Germans, on the other hand, they have a problem.
True, but the British, they expected a victory because that was Royal Navy tradition, right? because nothing except a big victory is going to do. Even though strategically they definitely could afford the loss, as you rightly said. But there was going to be a war of words. And, in the aftermath, like BT and Jellicoe would exchange a lot of sharp words. And a lot of the early blame went on to Jellicoe. One of the primary reasons was, BT had been having operational command for battles before Jutland, and he had a better PR image and media friends. So it's kind of easy to blame Jellicoe because let's not forget, BT lost 2 battle cruisers on his own against a numerically inferior foe. It's not like Jellicoe lost anything major or to that same scale, right? But BT said that Jellicoe robbed him of victory by caution. And I'm like, dude, you got beaten up pretty badly by some outgunned battle cruisers. What victory are you going to be talking about? Now, Jellicoe was blamed for his predominantly 2 decisions, which was not to, go through the minefields, and when that mass torpedo attack took place, for turning away from the torpedoes and not into the torpedoes. But there were like also some shortcomings that had to be addressed and would finally be addressed. One is the battlecruiser philosophy. The idea of the battlecruiser is it should be fast enough to catch any cruiser or be a scout ship, but also has the firepower to technically take on a larger capital ship. And one of its most prized assets is the speed. Now, the Germans, Simon, as you did point out, they did not sacrifice armor. They sacrificed firepower, which is why the German battlecruiser shells and guns were much smaller in caliber for the weight savings. And I think this is a good example is the Derfflinger, which was one of the German battlecruisers of Hipper. It had the same belt armor as the British dreadnought flagship of Jellicoe, the Iron Duke. Now that really puts things into perspective. And at the same time, the British went for bigger guns because their training doctrine really focused a lot on volume of fire. So one of the reasons that's important is if you have to focus on the volume of fire, they have to obviously get shells, ammo, powder up to the turrets quite quickly from the magazine below. And one of the easiest ways to go is to cut out the safety features. So the fire door, which saved the Lutza, like the Derfflinger, sorry, that was completely removed from the British battle cruisers. So Simon, it was to your point, right? Like the Germans addressed that issue. The British did not address this particular safety issue. And the British also had a problem with their armor-piercing shells. A bulk of the British AP shells would actually explode on impact, when such ships are supposed to have actually a delayed impact so that the momentum allows the shell to penetrate a bit deeper and then explode. So it's kind of like why the shells were not able to really penetrate the turrets of the German battle cruisers as well. All of these would definitely be, addressed during the course of the war, finally, because I think they learned it the hard way. But this was pretty much the battle of the battle cruisers, because the battle cruiser had its day. Yeah, we know the British are still going to try to use them and gonna have spectacular results in World War II. But barring this, every navy in the world would be moving towards fully fast, armored, heavy-hitting battleships that would in tonnage be exceeding 38,000, 40,000 knots, or in the Japanese case, doubling that to 75,000.
Because when you don't have much resources, make everything as big as possible.
Yeah. But that does bring me to the end of the Battle of Jutland. Kind of anticlimactic from when it felt like, the big fleets came together. And the German Navy would never sortie out again for the rest of the war.
Well,
It would be the submarine force that will be going, but the surface force is it's practically finished its course of action in the war.
well, they did actually try once again at the very end of the
Oh,
war, but that was not a good idea because, well, that caused the November Revolution in Germany, which ultimately led to the abdication of the emperor.
Yep.
but I think while we do finish this battle, and there's definitely, I think, Greg, will definitely be covering the submarine warfare of Germany in some future episodes.
Yeah, sure.
I think we could definitely talk about maybe one of the more, I mean, I really find that as an amazing thing, is the scuttling of the German fleet at Scapa Flow.
Sure. Before I jump into the scuttling, I'll just mention the Kiel Mutiny because I don't know, they go hand in hand, I find. So, like you mentioned, after the Battle of Jutland, the German Admiralty basically didn't want to risk their capital ships anymore, kept them at anchor. The officers, a lot of the officers were transferred to the U-boats, obviously, that were going out, and to very small vessels that could still potentially raid because they didn't stop small raids. Like there's always going to be small raiding efforts. But as we all know, in World War One, things get much worse every year for Germany. The rations are going to get really bad, and the sailors up until this point enjoyed decent rations. After this point, it gets kind of bad, and that alongside being demoralized and I guess you could say feeling cheated of a chance at victory, the German sailors are not happy. And there's also some political things going on. There's actually this political party, the anti-war Independent Social Democratic Party, and they're kind of, to brutally summarize, not treating the sailors very well at this point. And this leads to a lot of conflicts. There's petty grievances that lead to things like on the SMS Prince Regent Leopold, 49 crew disembark without permission at Wilhelmshaven to just go watch a movie, and the movie gets canceled. And like, there's a whole problem with that, and 11 guys they end up getting arrested. So 600 other crew members they try to come ashore to in support of their comrades. It leads to more arrests. Two guys get executed because it's seen as kind of like a potential mutiny. A lot of people are arrested afterwards, but that's just kind of the feeling of the time. After the 100 Days offensive, things are getting a lot worse for Germany. At this point, Prince Max of Baden, he's trying to openly seek peace, and he's trying to talk with President Woodrow Wilson. The worst president in the United States. That's my opinion. I hate this guy. And Wilson, he gives some preconditions to start the talks, and one of them is to end the submarine warfare, which is a big precondition. Despite Admiral Scheer not wanting this to happen, at this point, Admiral Scheer is chief of the Admiralty staff. The government does agree on October the 20th, and Scheer decides on his own authority to order Admiral Hipper, who's now the commander of the High Seas Fleet, to prepare for a decisive battle, basically, to just go out in a blaze of glory. And yeah, the High Seas Fleet, they're concentrating around Schilling Roads, just off of Wilhelmshaven, to prepare for what they think is going to be like the Gotterdammerung battle or something. And yeah, the sailors don't really like the idea of a suicide mission. So countless begin refusing to go out because, I mean, it's a death voyage. Most of the German sailors and soldiers see that peace is inevitable. There's going to be negotiations. So during the night of October the 30th, some sailors aboard the 3rd Battle Squadron, they simply decline to weigh anchor. It's insubordination. There's a lot of tussling going about with superior officers and the sailors. This is aboard ships like the Thuringen, the SMS Kaiserin, the SMS Helgoland. And the mutineers basically get the commanders on board with them, and the 3rd Battle Squadron heads back to Kiel. When they return, Vice Admiral Hugo Kraft, who I think he was the leader of the 3rd Battle Squadron, if I'm not mistaken, he does a successful maneuver with his battleships around the Helgoland Blight, and he tries to kind of regain the control over his crews. However, tensions still escalate. There's arrests of sailors, like on the Markgraf. The mutiny is still going on, and now in Kiel's canal, The sailors are starting to arrive there, and they're producing basically just a full-blown mutiny. On November the 1st, about 250 sailors, they gather in Kiel to demand their comrades' release. So it's almost identical to the movie theater incident. But they're rebuffed. It leads to more protests the day later. Leaders like Karl Outlet and Rolf Pop, they call for a meeting on the 3rd, uniting like thousands at this point under the slogan Frieden und Brot, peace and bread. So now this is like a full-blown uprising. They want to end the war, basically. And this is on the sailors' behalf. But it extends eventually to the soldiers and then to the workers who are already striking at this point. And I think in terms of numbers, you see maybe like 40,000 mutineers altogether start going through the streets. And they start going to all the major German cities. They have a list of demands. It's going to be a full-blown revolution. And it all starts here. And I don't want to go through the history, but this is, where Erich von Ludendorff starts the famous stab in the back myth that leads to the rise of Adolf Hitler and stuff. So it all kind of starts here in a lot of ways. But in the back thought of that, further into the future, when we're actually coming to the real armistice of November the 11th, 1918, the Entente powers are now going over the fine details. They got Germany to agree that the U-boat fleet has to be surrendered no matter what, because obviously it was the U-boats that were causing the most damage to Britain. But the status of the German surface fleet, it's kind of up in the air. They don't know what they want to do with it. The French actually just want to take all the ships, and the Italians too are on board with that. The British, they want to get rid of all the ships because that obviously benefits them. They want to have the biggest navy no matter what. So the Entente aren't even in agreement as to what they're going to do, But
Obviously, the French want to take away the ships, like free capital ships, right?
well, I mean, like the French are like, Germany shouldn't exist. It should be 100 different small little countries. We should go back to the 1600s. Like the French are the reason why World War II happens. Way too draconian.
I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, it was only France that really pushed for the very harsh Versailles conditions. Like Britain and the United States wanted to punish Germany, but they were willing to be quite, moderate
Yeah.
comparatively.
To
Yeah,
be
no.
It's
fair,
only like France.
we have to admit that the war was fought on their land. They suffered
Yeah.
way more than the British and the Americans, so
But
it's
it
a
is
little
actually
bit
said that
understandable.
like before the German Spring Offensive, the way they made that peace treaty with the Russians, right, who had started the Civil War in the 17th, like the way they just stripped away everything, because the Germans were like kind of wanted to get that negotiated peace, but they are controlling. When you put such a harsh treaty, you've not really endeared yourselves to good negotiations as well, though.
Yeah, I guess
Just gotta point that out.
that is a good point because the treaty in the East was ridiculous. But I mean, the Russian Empire completely collapsed. It's incredible how quick that goes down. But yeah, so the Germans are facing the French guns at the negotiating table. The Germans on November the 12th, they're instructed to take the High Seas Fleet out to sea because something is going to be done with it. And I noticed that when I was doing some research on this, the Entente powers threatened to occupy Helgoland, which I don't exactly understand why that's a big deal. But anyways, so they were threatening to occupy Helgoland, which I've been to. It's an interesting place. And the mutiny's still in the background ever since. Well, I mean, it's going to be going on actually for a few years. So that's always on in the background. But the German ships are then told that they're going to proceed to bring themselves over to an area where they're going to be interned and watched by the Entente powers. It's mostly Britain. And, well, von Hipper doesn't want to lead this because it's disgraceful. He refuses to do so. So he allows another one, Rear Admiral Ludwig von Rotha, to go do it for him, which, again, when the Germans are negotiating, it's the same thing the politicians end up doing. They just keep forcing someone else to sign off. So it's interesting. But on the 21st, 70 German ships, they're escorted off. And by the 25th, 27th, they're moving into the Scapa Flow area. And there's going to be more ships that are going to follow. But while these ships are interned, they're basically just out at sea. The Entente, they're the ones who have to provide the food and to watch over them and everything. And apparently the food quality was terrible. This is the British, so I would assume it was terrible food.
One moment, I'll just share one image. So they're just like, showing the, the way the fleet was interned as well.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, keep that up.
And I think just one thing also, I'm just trying to be a bit nice to the Brits also, is Scapa Flow is a great harbor, but it has nothing else.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it
I mean,
wouldn't
it's
matter
not
for
like
the Germans. They're not allowed to leave the ships, but yeah.
true, but I'm just talking about from the point of getting really crap food. Like, let's also be a bit
Oh, yeah, it's
considerate
true.
on that front.
But they do get brandy and they get rations of cigarettes or cigars. So, I mean, it's not awful.
It's one of the things of these soldiers and sailors, like,
Yeah,
guys, cigars, cigarettes. It's kind of
Who
ironic.
cares about
I know I'm just
who cares about good food when you can just smoke it out?
yeah, exactly.
It's
Recreate.
so funny that I just gotta say this. Montgomery knew the value of the cigars and cigarettes to his men, but absolutely detest anyone smoking in his face, even if it was the King of England.
Yeah. Recreation, it's quite limited because the Germans are not allowed to go offshore, onshore, and they're not allowed to visit the other German ships. So they're just cooped up this whole time. The British
And
provide
I'd
doctors.
I'd be bloody pissed, right? Like you're just stuck on a ship like this.
Yeah. The British provided doctors, but they refused to provide dentists, which, again, pretty funny that it's the British that are refusing dental care. It's a little ironic. And in the background of all of this happening, the Paris Peace Conference is still looking over the fine details, which I think a lot of general public don't realize. This was a long process. It wasn't like in one day we all these negotiations and then the terms. It took a long time. And the fate of those ships was always in the background of that peace conference. The French and Italians, like I said, they wanted to take about a quarter of the ships each. The British were like, no, let's just destroy them. The Germans were not permitted to scuttle their fleet under the Armistice Articles, obviously. It seems like a no-brainer. However, Admiral Eric Reda, yeah, that guy.
I just got one question though. I can understand France at least try to demand a quarter of the fleet because let's not deny that they contributed a lot more soldiers and such.
Yeah.
Why Italy?
Because Italy is just
They,
the biggest shithead in all these conflicts. Like,
I mean, literally the only reason the Italian front even existed in 1917 after a while was, the British and French sending in 12 divisions and getting Cardona sacked.
yeah.
Hmm?
No, the
Well,
Italian
they definitely needed more battles of the Isonzo to be influential.
20 more.
You mean so that we have more maps to play later?
That as well.
So our friend later on, Admiral El Reda, he's writing to Rute secret orders. He's saying, no matter what, we got to scuttle the fleet at all costs. And the German crews are gradually being reduced, so a lot of them are being released back to Germany. So by mid-June of 1919, Rute feels that he's got a lot of reliable men on hand and that he can coordinate the job. And he starts to send out orders to prepare the scuttling of all of these ships, which has to be done under the view of the British that are watching them. So it's quite a feat to do. On
By
the
the
20,
way, if I just might show, we have our 4 surviving battle cruisers here. The number 20, the Derflinger, 22 Wondertan, 23
yeah,
Molka, and 24 the Seidlitz.
yeah,
The heroes of Jutland, if you want to call them.
yeah, I guess the heroes of the battle that never really started, as they say. But on the 21st of June at around 10 a.m., the German fleet at Scapa Flow, they receive like a flag signal. They're going to prepare their scuttling. Then at about 11:20, a signal is sent out to all the commanding officers to begin doing this. And, this is all the men are standing there smashing the internal water pipes on the ships. I mean, they've left hammers strategically everywhere. They're draining the valves on the sewage tanks. They're facilitating all the flooding. They're preparing everything that you could have managed to get these ships to sink. And by
If
around
I'm
noon,
not mistaken, Craig, I think at this time also the bulk of the guarding British fleet had actually even departed on a training exercise
Yeah,
on this
this was
day.
coordinated very well. They did this at the appropriate time. I mean, they had a lot of time to plan this out, mind you. And it's around noon. A battleship like the Friedrich der Grosse, she starts to list quite heavily, prompting crews to
That
start
was
abandoning.
I'll just say Scheer's flagship during
Yeah,
Jutland.
exactly. Only a small British naval force was actually around. Vice Admiral Fremantle, he learns of the scuttling at around noon. Upon arriving with his squadron, he gets there about like 2:30. He's just seeing a bunch of sinking ships, with the battlecruiser Hindenburg being the last one that goes down about 5 p.m. So there's nothing that the British could do. What are they going to do? Board these ships and try to repair? Like it's not going to happen, right? They like the
Well,
British really screwed up.
to be fair, that's pretty much also what they wanted in the first
Yeah,
place.
exactly. So, I mean, there's always these conspiracy theories that the British were in on it anyways, because they just didn't want the French and Italians to get these ships. So who knows? But in total, 15 capital ships, 5 light cruisers, 32 destroyers are all sunk, and 9 German
To be
soldiers
fair,
died.
if I were the British, I would also be pretty happy with this. I think they were secretly quite happy with this. Though
Yeah,
officially they had to show like, you guys violated the terms, you're so bad, despicable guys.
yeah, exactly. It favored the British in the end, and
And
yeah, the
at
scuttling
least
didn't go well.
with the French.
With Eddie, I mean, not that it's the primary cause of future events, but it just contributes to what is, the early 1920s into this Weimar Republic, and then certain people rise up, and it just gives fuel to the fire of a new era in Germany.
Uh, the funny thing is, Admiral Rosalind Weimars, who was like, at that time the First Lord of the Sea, he privately remarked, I look upon the sinking of the German fleet as a real blessing. It disposes once and for all the theory question of the redistribution of these ships. Whereas
Exactly.
Scheer was so happy. And I think this is like, I guess, in the aftermath of World War One, Germany really giving another big screw you to France.
Yeah. And it's just ironic. El Qaeda was, the one who has these secret orders because, oh, this is a great opportunity to just really go into U-boats and not build up another surface fleet. But it's going to be goddamn El Qaeda who pushes to build a freaking surface fleet later and screw everything up. So, anyways, ironic.
Because it's not fun to, like, break a cork and champagne on a U-boat being launched
Yeah.
or even a destroyer. Because, hey, doing it on a battleship looks so much better for the press.
Yeah, and also if you are the captain of a battleship, that's what an image is. Or
Yeah.
a U-boat, well, that just stinks all the time. And you can't see it in the water.
Yeah.
But I think I really enjoyed this series because, talking about, like, say, the high point of the surface engagements, if I could use that term, of World War One.
Definitely is. And
But
before we go anywhere, I just want to repeat to the audience, if you haven't already decided to watch us on YouTube, you should. Gaurav put up a lot of maps, and it's a lot more understandable. I can't imagine listening to this as audio only. It's just a nightmare. So yeah, please check us out on YouTube. And if you'd like to further support the channel, please consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. If you join either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. So yeah,
yeah, thanks for guys for being hostage for the most of the episode while I just narrated on these maneuvers and thinkings of Jutland.
next one will be Letty Golf. Joking. That one's a night.
Are
That's
we
a
talking
worse
about like
nightmare.
a 30 episode series for Lady Gulf?
What was it? I don't know if I think it was Operations Room who broke it into like multiple episodes.
I think it was 5 episodes, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Like it's
so
2 hour
big.
supercut.
It's crazy.
But let's just give it the fact that the Musashi took such a beating that I don't know if any other ship could have survived so many hits.
Well, she was a super battleship, so yeah.
It should have gone down like that
Money well spent. You know, the Japanese are the
bottom of
only
the sea.
ones to rifle the Germans in building a large surface fleet, and then well, there it goes. Yeah.
At least they had built ships that technically became the superior arm of naval warfare at the time,
Yeah.
the aircraft carrier.
That's true. They had the foresight to do that. But
Well-
yeah.
Now they have become a great new reef in the ocean.
Yep. Actually, the largest. Have you ever seen the map of Japanese sunk vessels from World War II? And it's just like the entire Pacific Ocean is covered in them. It's insane. But yeah. Everybody, until next time.